Good morning. Staffordshire South East, a Tory majority of over 7,000 at the last election, a swing of only 6% or so needed for Labour to take it this morning, and of their last 5 gains at by-elections from the Tories, they've been clocking up an average swing of over 15%. They'll be quite upset if it's much smaller than that. As for the Tories themselves, as the count goes on in Tamworth, if they lose this seat, their majority in the House of Commons is down to 1. And even if they don't win, they'll be hoping for a sign that the tide is starting to turn in their favour, with the general election now no more than a year away, if they can hold on that long. To analyse this result, to talk about what it means for the parties, Professor Anthony King of Essex University is with me, John Sargent, our chief political correspondent, Stephen Dorrell, Secretary of State for Health, John Prescott, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Nick Harvey, Liberal Democrat campaign manager, and we hope to be joined later on by Tony Blair, the leader of the Labour Party from Washington. And also with us here, of course, Peter Snow. Peter.
And the swing's the thing, of course, by which we'll judge the performance of the parties. Labour needs a swing of just over 4% if it's to win a general election with an overall majority of 1. But the swing that Labour eyes will be on tonight is the 6.5% swing that they will need to win the by-election in Staffordshire South East. That would see, if it was reflected in the general election, Labour back with a majority of something like 50. But they want to do better than that. They'll want to get a swing of at least twice that, something like 13% at the very minimum, if they're to be sure of seeing off any possible recovery by the Tories between now and the general election. And they've done much better than that in by-elections recently. 29% swing in Dudley West, for example, just 15 months ago. David.
Well, let's just find out what's going on up at the count. Lance Price, you've been up there for a month, haven't you? Is that right?
I've been here for more than a month, actually. I came up here 5 weeks ago to do a story for the news about how the Conservatives were refusing to call this by-election. And on the day that I came up, just for the day, they decided on that date that they would call the by-election after all, and I've been here more or less ever since.
And are you in love with Staffordshire South East as a result?
A bond has grown between us, I can tell you that, David. There's a mutual affection which will take a long time to die down.
Well, tell us what your friends tell you has happened.
Well, one thing I can tell you for sure is that Labour have taken this by-election. I don't think there has been any doubt about that for some considerable time. In the past few moments, we've been given the turnout figures, which show a turnout of just under 60%, 59.6%, which is considered about average, about right for this sort of by-election. So the Conservatives privately are conceding that they haven't won it, that the seat has gone to Brian Jenkins, the Labour candidate. All we're talking about now is the Labour majority, whether it'll stay in single figures, whether it'll go to double figures. If it goes as high as 10,000, then we're talking about a swing to Labour of something over 17%, which of course would be very respectable.
OK, well, we'll be back with you again soon, Lance. Thanks very much indeed. Before we go any further, let's just have a quick look at this constituency that has been voting today, and the count is just going on at the moment. Let's have a look at what the place itself is like. The South East Staffordshire constituency lies at the heart of England on the edge of the West Midlands. The great majority of the population live in Tamworth, in the southeast of the constituency, the capital of the ancient kingdom of Mercia. It was twice razed to the ground by the Vikings, and Tamworth is still dominated by its 12th century castle. Tamworth's past lures the tourists, but today the town has newer attractions too, a booming leisure industry, which boasts Europe's only real snow indoor ski slope. The local economy is thriving. Unemployment is well below the national average. Many people work in small firms concentrated in the business parks around Tamworth. Others are attracted here by easy commuting to Birmingham and beyond. All this has made Tamworth one of the fastest growing towns in Britain, with a relatively young, prosperous population occupying new housing developments which have sprung up round the old market town. And it's here that strong Labour support is very much in evidence. The rest of the population is scattered across more than a dozen villages in the north and the west of the constituency. And a tour through this rural area reveals a mix of farming and white-collar commuter settlements. In this seat, which has been Tory since the constituency was created in 1983, there are still strong signs of a staunch Conservative tradition. Now, Tony King, John Major described this as a sort of Tory area, but it's not actually quite that now. It's more, it's the kind of place Blair would claim just as well. Middle class, professional people, prosperous, homeowners,
Well, it's the kind of place that has been Tory for a generation now. There's been an argument amongst the Conservatives in the constituency as to whether it really is part of the Tory heartland or not. I think most people, until the beginning of this by-election, would have thought it was very definitely part of the Tory heartland.
And at the next general election, despite what happens tonight, we'll expect it to go back that way or not?
The Labour Party would have to have a very large majority in the House of Commons indeed for this seat not to revert under its new name of Tamworth to the Conservatives.
John Sargent, what's your impression of it from your visits there?
Well, I must say I think it's the kind of place which Tony Blair has got to excite. He's got to be able to move people across from the Conservatives to New Labour, as he would put it. And it's a rather good testing ground, really, for Labour, and I think that it's just the by-election they wanted. It's just the right kind of area. They've got plenty of problems. It's rather representative of the country as a whole. So when you go there, you think of it very much as Middle Britain. Now, for the activists, it's a marginal area now. In by-election terms, it's a natural win for Labour, and that's obviously what we're going to see tonight.
What was this funny flurry at the beginning of the campaign when the Tories suddenly started saying that things are looking much better than they thought and this could be the turning of the tide and all that, which didn't seem to last for more than a week or so?
No, I think that was rather exaggerated in the reporting. One's got to think of the personality here, which was Kenneth Clarke, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, going out there, and I think in a very typical way for him, making it certain that he would play it strong and play it hard. Now, the point that he wants to get across, and Michael Heseltine, is that the general election, when it comes, will very much depend, if the Tories are going to win, on rising prosperity. Now, that argument is very much in the Chancellor's mind, so he used it in Tamworth. Of course, it's been used against him because they'll say, right, well, if Labour win and you lose in Tamworth, then you've lost the argument over prosperity and you lose the general election. Now, I don't think it's as simple as that, but I think that Ken Clarke's ebullient behaviour rather backfired on this occasion.
OK. Well, Peter Snow, let's have a look at this constituency from your point of view and how it went in the last election.
And it has quite a symbolic importance for the Tories, Tamworth, because right outside the town hall is Sir Robert Peel standing there reminding us all that 162 years ago he produced the Tory manifesto that some people think started off the new Tory party that's been with us ever since. So there's Robert Peel. It's not that comfortable a seat for the Tories, actually. David Lightbourne, with a Conservative vote of 29,180, was not that far ahead of Brian Jenkins, the leader of Labour Council, as he later became, on 21,988. Liberal Democrats were doing very well in the seat back in the 80s. They came second twice, and the others there, 895. 7,192, the majority, and this is how it breaks down in terms of share last time. There you have the Tories comfortably ahead with 13% of the vote, more than Labour, 51% Conservative, 38% Labour. The Liberal Democrats down here on 10%. They're not really in the fight this time. So what Labour want to see then is at least these two blocks here changing places. Labour on 50 plus, the Tories on 40 minus. That's what Labour want to see, a swing of 13%, 14% plus, if they're going to be confident that this sets them going well for a general election. Now, the opposition would be pretty unwise to start getting wildly excited about Staffordshire South East being lost by the Tories. Conservative by-election losses in the last 13 months of several parliaments have shown huge drops in the Conservative vote. There's Birmingham Northfield back in October 1982, not that long before the 83 election, down 16%. Rydale, disaster for the Tories, everybody thought, 18% drop. Liberal Democrats gained it with an 18% drop in the Tory vote before the 1987 election. 91, there was Ribble Valley going down, 22% drop in the Tory vote in Ribble Valley. Monmouth, May 91, getting a little better for the Tories, but still 14% down on their general election vote in Monmouth. And Langbath, it was down just 3%, and in Kincardine it was down 10%. So if the Tories can hold the drop in their vote down to that sort of level, the 3%, 10% they suffered in Kincardine and Langbath, they won't be doing too badly. But the point to make about all this is that every single one of those 6 by-election losses by the Tories were regained at the subsequent general elections. And indeed, Labour have not gained one by-election seat from the Tories since 1979 and held it in a subsequent general election. David.
And John Prescott, is that how it's going to be this time?
No, I think things have considerably changed. I think New Labour in that sense does represent something different, and we've seen that in the constituency, and I think we'll see it in this election. I think there are a number of things that have changed. The nature of the Labour Party itself, the arguments that have been put forward, and indeed reaching out to an awful lot more people. There's a lot of examples of that, and I think Tony Blair's been making that clear. But there's no doubt about it. The result tonight clearly means it's going to be a victory for Labour, and I think it will be crushing any hope of revival from the Tory party. And I can just say to John Sargent, when he just says that Ken Clarke made the point about a victory, Mr Rifkin made it. 3 or 4 ministers actually predicted a victory in that in this by-election, and I think only Mr Duncan has now been saying if we lose it by 5,000, that'll be okay and a victory for us. Well, if he's content with losing, we're content with winning.
All right, Stephen Dorrell, will you take a wager with Mr Prescott about the outcome of the general election after you've heard this result tonight?
I'm not a betting man, but what I certainly will do is to point out that in this election I'm confident the result will show an improvement in our performance compared with some previous by-elections. And through the opinion polls,
which previous by-elections? I mean, since we're asking you to mark our card, even if you're not a betting man.
Let's talk about the result when it comes through.
But you said compared with some. Which
you've referred, for example, to the Dudley by-election. It seems to me that we've seen an improvement in the atmosphere since then. I shall certainly be disappointed if we don't see an improvement in our performance since the Dudley by-election. And I think that's the evidence for that is the opinion polls. The evidence is also very striking when you go and listen to people on the doorstep, where the atmosphere among people who may still be disappointed former Tory voters is nonetheless changing, and changing quite fast in the government's favour.
Nick Harvey, it seemed the Liberal Democrats didn't bother with this election at all.
Well, I think in fairness we knew from the start that there wasn't much here for us. All the by-elections in Tory seats so far in this Parliament have been won clearly by the party that had been in second place at the general election. Here we had been a distant third. We've had our day in the other by-elections, Newbury, Christchurch, Eastleigh, Littleborough and Saddleworth, 4 in this Parliament out of the 6. But we've realised from the start that we weren't going to do particularly well here.
But some people smelt a rat when your candidate said that if electing a Labour MP brings forward the date of a general election, it may be, I quote, a price worth paying. It sounds as though the Liberal Democrats went much further than you said and actually were urging people to vote Labour.
Oh, certainly not urging people to vote Labour, but I think the country is ready for a general election, and the people of Tamworth were ready for a general election, and if the Conservatives don't get a good booting tonight, it will be very surprising.
Yeah, but she did actually, she was actually saying to people, don't bother to vote Liberal Democrat here, vote Labour, wasn't she?
No, she didn't say that, but I think she was being realistic, as I think I'm being realistic, that there wasn't much here for us, and I think that the comparison for us this evening will be with 2 seats early in the Parliament where Labour were in a distant third position and were coming in with percentages of 2% or so. If we can do a little better than that, then I think we'll be reasonably content.
Stephen Dorrell, what kind of swing then against the Tories would you find not too damaging?
Well, what I'm looking for is evidence, continuing evidence, of a trend that I think has been there, as I said, both in the opinion polls and in the evidence of people talking to electors on doorsteps, of an improvement in the standing of the Tory party among its potential supporters. And if you look at Dudley West, which is a seat in very much the same 29%,
yes.
If we see an improvement from that, then that's obviously a source of some encouragement, and it's a question of how big an improvement we're able to
absolutely ridiculous.
All right, John Prescott.
There was a 46% turnout in Dudley. This is the kind of managing the propaganda of loss. What it really means is that was the midway in the period. They lost the vote on value-added tax. They were divided as a party. Most of their people, a lot of their people stayed at home. The vote collapsed. I think we did this programme at that time, and you thought it was a wonderful result. I mean, it was really quite terrible. What you've got to take into account here is a similar period. This is the last 12 months before an election, and you really do have to consider those seats that are that close to the general election. It does make a difference, because if you look at the 2 periods of times that we're talking about, at the early period of a government, any by-elections lost are very big swings against it, and they slide down to almost half that result. And that's the same in both those periods. So Littleborough and Saddleworth was 17% and Dudley was 29%. And what we've got now, Langbar, which in the last one before the election in April 1992, was something like 3.6 swing to Labour. That would be a fairer way of doing it. But either way, this is Mr Dorrell already trying to massage another disastrous result. That's no doubt why Mr Malwinnie's not here. He predicts victories and doesn't turn up.
Oh, no, we invited Stephen Dorrell.
But he's the chairman of the party. He goes waffling around the country about how the turnaround for the government. He manages the campaign, but doesn't come here and sends old Stephen Dorrell with the campaign kind of acceptable face of the Tories to put the result on.
Well, it's nice of you to describe me as acceptable, John. For that, at least, I'm grateful. And what we shall see, I'm confident this evening, is an improvement in the performance in this by-election compared with some previous ones. I've mentioned Dudley. You've mentioned some others, but it's worth reminding the viewers that it was at the beginning of this programme, it was pointed out to them that within a year of winning the last general election, the government lost the Ribble Valley by-election with a swing against us of Peter's figures of 22%. Now, what we're looking for is an improvement compared with the position that we got in this Parliament in a neighbouring seat 30 miles away in Dudley.
Well, let's just remember that Langbar, which you quoted, had an Asian candidate, and the general view was that the swing against the Tories was hugely reduced because there was a racist vote against him. Well, and that's why it fell as low
I'm
as
sorry to say that. It might be a percentage of 2, and I wouldn't like to get into that argument. I understand what you're saying by it, but I did try to give you the other period before the other election where the actual results there were a lot lower. Actually, than the beginning of the electoral cycle.
Let's call on Peter Snow for some help on this. Peter.
Well, I could have given you some help on that, but I'd rather want to move it on, if I may, to suggest there's another measure of public support for the parties at the moment, which might be worth looking at, which is local government by-elections. Now, local government by-elections have been studied very carefully by Plymouth University Election Centre down in the West Country, and they're suggesting that based on local government by-elections, 6 or 7 of them every night, every Thursday night, over a 3-month period, January to March 1996, are showing a Labour lead of 20%. 46% Labour, 26%, this is the national projection based on those by-elections, and 24% the Liberal Democrats. Now, that 20% lead for Labour as a result of those by-elections, projected from those by-elections, is rather less than the lead in the opinion polls and actually makes the Tory position look a bit better. Look back over the last 16 months or so, and you see that back in January to March 95, that Labour lead was 24% as projected by the by-elections, 22% in the second quarter, 20% in the third quarter, and down to 16% the Labour lead as a result of those by-election, local government by-elections in the last quarter of 95. Now, unfortunately for the Tories, that seems to have popped up again, and indeed in January to March, the Labour lead now looks like 20%, and indeed March is rather worse than January and February. So there is really no discernible sign of that Tory advantage being pushed forward into 1996 in these local by-elections. Rather different message from the polls, which show a very, very wide gap really between the Tories and Labour, with not really very much improvement for the Conservatives. That's hopeful for them, but that isn't.
Winnie has been telling us about local elections, that it's all turned round again. Feeding this idea of a revival was now to come about, feeding the propaganda of the argument, but that's quite wrong and shows Mr. Mulwiney has not been telling the truth about local authority elections.
You mean that's quite right?
This is right. What Mr. Mulwiney has said is that in fact it is continued, there's been a revival, and now we go to our new by-election, which is going to be Tamworth.
Tony King, I want to bring you in on what Stephen Dorrell said. He said any improvement on the 29% swing at Dudley West in December 94 would be good for the Tories. So 28%.
Well, it isn't quite what I said. What I said is I should be looking for that as the datum point at how much we have improved.
Right, well, do you think he's making it very easy for himself?
Yes, I think he is rather. 29% is the largest swing, I think, in any by-election from the Conservatives to Labour since the Conservative and Labour parties were invented. So he is making it rather easy for himself.
No, that's not quite right. It's the largest from Tory to Labour. In Christchurch earlier in this Parliament, we had a swing against us of 35%.
Yes, you don't have to go on scourging yourself.
I'm simply establishing that we do clearly, as everybody knows, have a relatively low point from which to recover, but it doesn't alter the fact that if you recover from it, there is a recovery going on.
Yes, I was about to say people use this phrase all the time, the turning of the tide, but when people talk about the turning of the tide, I want to know where the tide is. And for the Conservatives, the tide is in the upstairs bedroom. It's got to do an awful lot of turning before the Conservatives can begin to feel comfortable.
Okay, I think an interesting question here is what is Stephen Dorrell talking about? Let's look at the Conservative by-election losses in this Parliament. Here are the seats which the Conservatives have lost with the drop in the Conservative vote each time. There's Newbury, Liberal triumph, down 29%. Christchurch was an all-time record for a Tory drop, way back indeed at the beginning of this Parliament, 32% drop there for the Tories. In Eastleigh, a drop of 26%. In Dudley West, as Stephen Dorrell was saying, one he doesn't want to see repeated tonight, a drop of 30%, a swing of 29% against the Conservatives. Now in Perth, there was an SNP attack on the Conservatives there. They were down 19%. and 20% in Littleborough and Saddleworth. Now, is Stephen Dorrell saying that he wants to see drops more like the 20% in Littleborough and Saddleworth? Is that the kind of drop he'd be satisfied with? Or does he really expect the drop to be as bad as those drops over there? Stephen Dorrell, what do you think about that? Well, is this all okay?
No, clearly not, but it's better than 29. And what I'm seeking to do is to record the fact that if the Tory party secures a better result in terms of votes lost than in Newbury, Christchurch, Eastleigh and Dudley, then there is then, despite what John Prescott says, Brian Mawhinney is right to say that a recovery of the Tory vote is going on.
Isn't it a bit late?
What?
Isn't it a bit late?
Well, the only time we shall know when it's too late is when we know when the general election is.
But within 12 months out, and you'll be happy with 15, 16%.
What I'm doing is reminding you of Peter's earlier comment that at the Ribble Valley by-election, at the equivalent point in the last Parliament, we were 22 points down. He asked me if I'd be satisfied with 20. Well, if history repeated itself precisely, suggests we'd do 2% better at the next general election than we did at the last one.
John Sargent.
Can I just comment on the Ribble Valley point? The difficulty about by-elections is to try and remember what the issue was at the time. The issue, for example, over the Ribble Valley by-election was to do with the poll tax. And people thought by voting against the Conservatives at Ribble Valley, they would finally see off the poll tax. Now, we know, in fact, the decision to remove the poll tax had been taken before then, but that was still the atmosphere of the by-election. I think one of the problems we've got here, going through all this massive figures, is that you've got to deal with each one as sort of what were the issues at the time, what was the history of it. What is happening at the moment is really quite different. There have been some confusing issues before the public, from Scott through Dunblane to the BSE crisis, which is setting an entirely different atmosphere for this by-election, which again makes it difficult for the government, but also difficult to read, I think, in terms of the general election result. So I think that's the point that we ought to stick to.
And Dudley West, there was the VAT vote, wasn't it? There we actually defeated them on the VAT. Tax increase during that election, and they were very divided. So that dominated that election, and I think what John says is right about that. Issues do determine it a lot.
Let's hear from Lance Price then, who was following this by-election, what he thought the issues were and what the people of Staffordshire South East said about it as it went along. Here's Lance Price.
From early on, Tory Jimmy James claimed to have victory in his sights. If fighting talk won elections, this former army major would soon have his seat on the Westminster merry-go-round.
That wasn't a bad try, sir.
But if he started thinking he had a shot at winning, it soon became clear a more modest target was called for, like blowing a hole in the perception of a demoralised party heading for opposition.
Shot out or not? No. You've got to get rid of all the reds, you see.
If you can't get rid of the Reds, you can at least make life uncomfortable for them. The sight of Tory pickets on the streets to greet Tony Blair was role reversal indeed. They were angry at the easy ride he was enjoying. But it all looked more SWP than HMG. Just as galling for the Tories was the lacklustre style of the Liberal Democrats. They weren't going out of their way to stop Labour soaking up the anti-government vote. Not even the luck of the Irish was going to help them here. This was a by-election the party will be happy to forget, while Labour's Brian Jenkins seemed to love every minute.
We're very, very proud of our town, very proud of our area.
An exhibition of local history dreamt up by Mr Jenkins, who's leader of the council. At times it seemed he thought Tamworth was his by right, though at the last election, while the rest of Britain was swinging Labour, this seat was swinging Tory. Tamworth has a strong Conservative tradition. The Victorian Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, was MP here, so the man looking to succeed him today went easy on this early One Nation Conservative.
Yes, but people would remember him also for getting rid of the corn laws and bringing cheap bread for the poor, and also the father originator of the modern police force. So you see, not everything he done was bad.
In his Tamworth manifesto, delivered from this window in 1834, Sir Robert Peel made the then radical suggestion that politicians should keep the promises they make at election time. High-minded principles which led to some rather less sophisticated political arguments during this campaign. Labour said the Tories don't keep their promises. The government said the opposition don't have the guts to make any in the first place. You might have thought that the Conservatives would have wanted to make quite a bit of old Sir Robert during this campaign. He was, after all, the father of the modern, pragmatic, moderate Conservative Party. Except, of course, that he alienated his own right wing, saw his party split down the middle, and failed to form a majority government until 7 years after his famous manifesto. Splits over Europe have wrecked more recent Tory campaigns, so the presence of the party's arch Europhile was bound to raise hackles.
Mr. Clark, I've been a Conservative 20 years, never again, and you are the reason. Vote for the UK Independence Party, which supports Britain.
But a mid-campaign split over the Chancellor's hostility to a referendum was deftly avoided.
You ought to ask the Labour Party, actually, whether they agree on the situation that we've clearly arrived at in a perfectly sensible cabinet decision on all the things that people say have been dividing us in the past.
Pausing only to paper over the name of their last by-election candidate, the UKIP has been fighting a single-issue campaign against what it sees as Euro meddling.
We have been fighting every by-election since 1992. Short of out-and-out revolution, fighting by-elections is our method of getting our message across. A little while ago, and we had some information that's come through to me from head office, and the subject, the European standards for condoms.
Does anyone know where Jimmy is?
Getting your voice heard is never easy as a fringe candidate. Mr. Samuelson here gained some notoriety, having himself arrested for upsetting ministers like Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell. Proposed ward closures made health a major issue. While the Liberal Democrats were on the streets collecting signatures in protest, the two main parties were trading insults over a psychiatric unit on the outskirts of town. Labour claimed it was about to be shut down and faced Tory charges that they were lying.
Local Conservatives and local people know that when I said this, I was speaking the truth.
I think it's very unfortunate indeed that they have caused a lot of upset and concern to local people by putting across a story that isn't true.
Well, this time they've just picked the wrong lie. The people around here know the truth, and they will show them on the April 11th.
I think that they will take their decisions about voting on the 11th of April based on the way that they've been treated in this regard.
No matter what you say about politicians, they're not all stupid. So far as we know, no one has been tempted during the campaign to go in for a photo opportunity with the Tamworth pig. Although I don't know why. Miss Piggy here, and yes, that really is her name, seems friendly enough. But that doesn't mean that the politicians have been able to ignore the farming vote altogether. Far from it. It looked like this could become the mad cow election, with a guest appearance by Flo, once Britain's most valuable cow, now facing possible slaughter. Again, the Tories were on the defensive at public meetings. Again, their much-promised recovery seemed a long way off.
I heard a report today that Hills, the bookies, haven't taken a bet on the Conservatives since the BSE scare.
BSE has been a subject invariably brought up at public meetings like this one.
Most so-called public meetings in by-elections these days are actually pretty stage-managed affairs. The greatest single fear of politicians and their minders is being caught off guard.
We've got to be honest with people. The only thing I'm gratified is that it was a member of the press, not a member of the Labour Party.
Well and truly open.
Cutting the tape is one thing, especially when it means another new business.
Tomorrow in Leeds. No. I know very well.
Being measured by one when you're known for your girth is quite another. In fairness, most of them did brave the Tamworth shopping arcade, searching for supporters and usually finding them.
Yeah, where's Lance Prescott? He's missing all these Conservative voters.
There was nowhere they wouldn't go in search of votes. For the diminutive but energetic Tory campaign manager Alan Duncan, where better than Tamworth's indoor, real snow ski slope.
Where did you think? I've been waiting for you.
I've been conducting a little interview at the top with a first-time voter who is now going to vote Conservative.
The Liberal Democrats had no illusions about winning, but went up many a garden path anyway. Having a famous MP on hand is always supposed to impress.
I'm Jeanette Davey, I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate, South East Staffordshire.
Though perhaps some MPs are more memorable than others.
How do you do? And this is Charles
Kennedy.
Charles Kennedy.
Jimmy James, are you Conservative candidate?
Now, live, mate. Okay, nice to meet you. All right, let's go on. He's here somewhere.
Yeah, but it's
With business on the move in Tamworth, all the parties sought to associate themselves with the vibrant local economy. Not much clear blue water here. The success of companies like Metrocab was hailed by ministers as a triumph, though some workers seem reluctant to give them much credit for it. While Metrocab was thriving, another car company, makers of the famous Reliant Robin, looked in poorer health. But it spluttered back to life in mid-campaign, another lurch forward for the economy under the Tories. Labour preferred to travel more gracefully. Theirs was a safe, steady-as-she-goes strategy which left little to chance. When you think you're coasting to victory, nobody, nothing must be allowed to rock the boat, and nothing much did. Despite some brave, indeed fighting talk from the Conservatives, the underlying assumption throughout this campaign is that Labour were out in front and were almost certain to win. The other parties haven't really managed to shake that assumption, and for the Conservatives in particular, that's been a serious problem. After all, Tamworth and the surrounding area is prosperous, and people know that it is. Ministers have always argued that once the economy came good and people knew that it had, the Conservatives' political fortunes would come good too. But in this constituency, that doesn't appear to have happened. Bad news for the Tories here, no doubt. Even more serious when it comes to their planning for the general election campaign. But that's a battle for another day. For now, Brian Jenkins is looking secure behind the battlements. In over a month of campaigning, Labour rarely lowered its guard, the walls were never breached. And it looks tonight as if another Tory citadel has fallen.
Well, that report was by Lance Price, who's up at Tamworth at the count. And Lance, just before you talk to your guests up there, how long is it now before you think we'll get the result?
We're still talking fairly confidently about a result around about 2 o'clock in the morning, so that's just over half an hour from now.
I thought you were talking confidently about 1:40 when we went on the air.
No, I don't think so. I didn't say anything about 1:40. No, 2 o'clock we're expecting.
2 o'clock. All right. Well, you better keep talking then.
OK, well, I'll fill in between now and 2 o'clock if you want me to. And to help me do that, we have 3 of the MPs who've been playing a leading role in this campaign, from left to right, perhaps literally from left to right in front of me. David Rendell from the Liberal Democrats. We hear now that the Liberals are way to the left of the Labour Party. Beside him, Bruce Grocott from the Labour Party and Alan Duncan from the Conservative Party. Now, Alan, when did you know for sure that the Labour Party were going to win this by-election?
You never know until it's declared. I mean, expectations are a funny thing. I mean, David Dimbleby's just been messing you about on expectations at the time of the count. We went into this to win. We fought a very positive campaign, and we went through all the main issues which we think matter to people, and we gave them positive arguments why they should vote Conservative.
But you and others were telling us confidently at the beginning of this campaign that this could be the one to break your unbroken cycle of defeat. So did you ever really mean it?
What we've said is that our canvass returns have been honestly put to you. There's been a very large, wavering group of people, and we've never known, of course, how they're going to perform on the day. So, no, we haven't deceived you at all. In fact,
you've been talking up your expectations from day one.
All independent commentators have said this has been the most spirited, vigorous, effective Conservative campaign for a long time, and I think it's been very exhilarating. And we don't yet know what the result is, but I think everyone will say that this campaign has actually marked a difference in the way we've gone about our campaign.
Was part of that campaign talking up your expectations from the outset?
We all know there's a bit of psychological warfare in any election campaign. You know, we all know that. Even Bruce Grocott, in his most generous moments, would admit this. But I don't think we've deceived, and I think there is a definite change of mood on the doorstep. I mean, the venom's gone. I've been at Littleborough and Saddleworth, Dudley West, all those places, and there was real venom on the doorstep, but that has evaporated, and all the people who've come up from London, observed professionals like you, have actually said the same thing.
Now, David Rendell, for the Liberal Democrats, nobody could accuse you of talking up your expectations. You never really had any, did you? I mean, you never really tried.
Well, we were certainly trying. We want, obviously, in any election like this to get as many votes as we can. But inevitably, when you start well down in third place, you expect to get squeezed very hard by the second party, and I've no doubt that's been happening during this campaign.
But weren't you effectively working on behalf of the Labour Party throughout this campaign? You made no effort to take votes from them.
Oh, no, on the contrary, we were trying to take votes from whoever we could take votes from, and I'm sure to some extent we've been able to do that, although we've also no doubt been squeezed by Labour at the same time. That's inevitable when you start off in third place. But I think the important thing about this election, from our point of view, was were the Conservatives yet again in for a trouncing by either of the other two parties? Because that is what is going to set the scene for the local elections on May the 2nd. It was very important to us that the Tories should be beaten here and beaten badly, and I expect they have been.
Will you expect the Labour Party to do you the same favour if there's another by-election when you are the clear challengers?
I don't expect the Labour Party to do us any favours at all, but they didn't have to in places like Newbury and Christchurch and Littleborough and Saddleworth and Eastleigh, all of which we won very handsomely, in spite of the fact that Labour were undoubtedly trying very hard to beat us.
Bruce Grocott, they have done you a favour, haven't they?
No, no one's done us any favours. What's done the Labour Party favours during this election is pursuing a traditional by-election campaign of bringing front benchers up each day to be grilled by the press, to get our candidate round amongst the people, a very popular candidate. And I think, if I can say so, one of the many mistakes that the Conservatives made during this campaign was thinking that the way you win by-election campaigns is by talking to newspaper journalists. The way you do that, the way you win campaigns, is by talking to voters, and that's been our priority throughout.
We do seem to have
and the longer the campaign's gone on, the more popular both our policies and presentation, and certainly Brian Jenkins, the candidate, has been.
We do seem to have seen a much cosier relationship between the two parties of what we now understand are the centre and centre-left throughout this campaign. Will you do the same favour for the Liberal Democrats that they've done for you?
I think I have to say to you that the first meeting I've had with David Rendell during the course of this campaign has been today, when you very kindly invited us to take part in this programme. There's been absolutely no meeting whatsoever.
I'm not suggesting that he got on the phone to you at the outset and said that we won't try here if you won't try next time.
No, we have fought this campaign in the same way that we fought previous by-election campaigns, presenting the policies of the Labour Party to the electors. We've got a popular leader, we've got a popular candidate, and I must say that I don't often feel sorry for Tories, but if I'd have been around in Tamworth as a Tory for the last 3 weeks with a big blue rosette, knocking on doors and saying, I'm from the government and I think they're doing a terrific job, I think that was a pretty tricky message to get across.
Alan Duncan, would it have made much difference to you if the Liberal Democrats had been fighting a bit harder here?
No, not a great deal. I think they wrote themselves off at the very beginning. One thing Bruce Grocott's just said, though, which is just so blatantly untrue, I think it has to be mentioned, is that they've put their policies to the people of Tamworth and the villages round about. They have not put any policies whatsoever to the electorate of South East Staffordshire. Anyone looking at their campaign literature will see only, in bright red letters, a tirade of abuse against a Conservative government. It has been entirely negative.
A Tory policy-free campaign.
Once again, I think we see the contempt which Tory minders have for the voters. Apparently they're saying, and we'll have to wait, of course, to see the result, but if it does turn out that we won this by-election, what Alan Duncan is obviously saying is that the public of Tamworth really haven't made a very sensible decision on the basis of the two campaigns and the two sets of policies that have been presented to them.
All I'm saying is that you put nothing positive forward. Perhaps you could just give 2 or 3 positive things that you put forward in your literature, to which we can then go and refer later to see it in there in black and white.
Well, I always take the precaution of retaining with me Conservative press releases, and we'll read 1 or 2 out for you if you like.
You claim to have put to the electorate here Labour policy. There hasn't been any Labour policy put to the electorate here. What political positive policy did you put to the electorate of South East Staffordshire? I'm all ears. I'm listening.
You're getting overexcited.
No, I'm just asking for an answer.
I think what I would suggest to you very strongly is to check back on your own press releases which you've been putting out during the course of this campaign at the rate of 2 or 3 a day, when you should have been out knocking doors and talking to voters, which started with you telling the good people of this constituency that you were just 2 points behind Labour, A week later, you were telling the people of this constituency that you were ahead of Labour and you're going to win. And now I think you've been walking around this hall explaining to journalists that if you lose by 5,000, that will be a tremendous victory for the Conservative Party. I'm all in favour of people being happy.
Please, just give us a positive policy you put to the electorate. That's all perhaps viewers would like to hear. Just one.
How about coming along to one or two of our election meetings or press conferences and discussing these matters?
But viewers will have noticed that Bruce Crocott has been unable to put forward a single positive policy.
You've had the opportunity of watching. Will have noticed that Alan Duncan's a bad loser.
They're both arguing about how well they've done, they claim, in putting forward policies to the people of this area. Now, I understand that there was a meeting here during the campaign about the Child Support Agency, to which all the candidates were invited. And it was only the Liberal Democrat candidate who bothered to turn up. The other two simply don't have a policy to put forward. They didn't even try to put forward a policy on that particular issue. Although any MP will tell you that it is currently one of the most important issues, in the sense that we get probably more correspondence about the Child Support Agency from people who are really fed up with what is happening in that agency, fed up with the inefficiency, fed up with the way that they're being treated by that agency. And it's that important to the people, but it seems to be totally unimportant to either the Conservative or the Labour Party.
OK, well, I'm afraid we must leave it there. David Randall, Bruce Crocott, Alan Duncan, thank you very much. David, back to you.
Lance Price with the three minders of the candidates up there. Well, John Sargent was saying a moment ago that by-elections swung on particular issues, and you could identify the issues that allowed the Tories to be defeated in the various by-elections, or in some of them. John Prescott, what is the issue in this by-election?
Well, I think overall there was certainly, when it's argued that we were arguing about the government's record, it's what we call the trust and betrayal. That was certainly an important factor, and I think Mr Duncan referred to that when he found on the doorstep. He said they were not so hostile now, but they certainly weren't all that friendly. We made an issue of health, of course, which Stephen Dorrell came up, and we got into exchanges about health policy, education, crime, economy, tax. We had tax issues right through the campaign.
So there was no issue, really, just all issues?
No, they were the main ones, actually, the ones that, in fact, we've seen to be well ahead of. In the polls, I think, was in Today and the Times, showing that Labour in most of these policy areas, except two, are well ahead of the government.
You were ahead on those policies at the last general election, in some cases, weren't you? And you lost the general election.
Yes, well, I mean...
And the NHS, you're always ahead.
No, there were other points. I think we've been well ahead in these policies in far greater extent than we were at that particular time, though I would argue things have changed, certainly since Tony Blair's become leader. Most people accept that. I think we've had a rating in the polls at a far greater, higher and higher levels than any other political party in history. There are a number of things that have changed, and we wait to see the general election. But a good example of that is going to be the one today, isn't it? This is a Tory safe seat, and I'm predicting it's going to be a Labour safe seat.
What were the issues, Stephen Dorrell?
Well, I think it's quite interesting to try to elaborate, to try to get out of some of the list of things that John Prescott has just laid before us, some of the speeches that Tony Blair makes, to try to be clear what, in fact, Labour policy on some of these key issues is. Take only today, Mr Blair's been talking about tax.
Well, we talk about that later. I was asking you what the issues were, not what Mr Blair was saying today in Washington. Yeah. What were the issues? You were up there. He says they were all on about the National Health Service. The polls show it's top of the list. Yeah. People dislike what the Tories have done to the National Health Service and trust Labour on it.
Perfectly true that in Tamworth there was a straightforward scare tactic run. The Labour candidate said we were going to close a facility. It was a brand new facility. Not only are we not going to close it, we're actually putting more money into expanding it.
And what about the rest of the country? What about the rest of the country that seems to endorse the view of Tamworth?
Well, in terms of the health service, as you rightly say, the health service has been a story right through the 1980s and early 1990s, where Labour has usually, in fact, always been ahead of us in terms of public preference for Labour over Tory on the National Health Service. I think that's unfair, and the reason I think it's unfair is that right through that period we've seen a government in office that has seen the expansion of the health service, the development of the health service, building on a record that goes right back to 1948 under governments of all political complexions. There is no difference, actually, between the British political parties on their commitment to building and developing the National Health Service.
Well, you've done a pretty bad job on persuading the public of that, because there appears to be about 80% or something
60
favour Labour's.
The figure.
60. Well, there are two lots of figures, aren't there? Because there are two polls.
60 is the figure. It scored on my heart. And what you've seen ever since 1948, is the story of developing the National Health Service as something that I think is a great British success story. It's actually been, despite the attempts of parties repeatedly over the years to make party political capital out of it, it's actually been one of the things that both Labour, ourselves, and the Liberal Democrats ever since 1948 have been agreed about.
But we're preferred on law and order. That wasn't normally what they expected with
You're
Labour.
not, with great respect, preferred on the line you've been taking on Michael Howard's latest commitment.
I just see here today it says law and order, that people accept Labour's policies more than tolerant. Every one of the areas. Just don't stick on health. I mean, this is what the public says.
I was sticking on health because I was asked the question about health and I happen to be responsible for it. Now, Bruce Grocott says, go and listen to people on the doorstep. I invite you to do the same rather than the newspaper
We were doing it
all right, go and listen to what they say
Nick
on
Harvey
the
on this
doorstep
point.
about Michael Howard's latest proposals.
Nick Harvey, what do you made no running up there, but no doubt you went. Did you go up there?
Yes, I did. Yes,
you did once. Once or more?
Once.
Just once.
I don't
as campaign manager.
Well, I wasn't the campaign manager on this occasion.
I'm only teasing you, really, but I mean, you have been there. You know where.
Yes, of course I have. Yes.
What did you think?
Well, there wasn't a single issue that was galvanising the campaign in the way John Prescott has said that VAT on fuel has done in the past. I think Eve Allen Duncan is right in saying, as he was claiming, that there is less hostility towards the Tories now than there has been in the past. That's almost because people are beginning to feel faintly sorry for them. I think that the public has actually decided how it's going to vote. It has decided it's going to boot them out. The public are now sort of resigned to that and just waiting for the day to be named and when it's going to happen. And that some of the anger has in fact actually gone out of it because they think it's more or less a foregone conclusion that they're going to be out. And I think that the result tonight will be another resounding defeat for the Tories. Stephen Dorrell can argue that it's not just quite as bad as some of their other defeats have been, but at the end of the evening, it's going to be a thumping defeat. So
you don't buy the argument
that along the way.
You don't buy the argument that their anger is slowly being tempered by the improvement in the economy.
No, I really do not believe there is any evidence for that at all. If we think about the chart that Peter Snow was showing earlier, which is real votes cast in real elections, showing that trend, no matter what Brian Mulroney has been saying, there has still been this solid rejection of the Tories at the ballot box, and we're coming up to the local elections on May the 2nd. We're going to see what happens there. I think, again, you're going to see the Tories getting bloody noses right the way across the country, and then the pressure really heaping up onto the government, and the day just getting nearer.
Let's stick with the issues for the time being. Peter, what evidence do you have of how the issues are affecting voters?
Well, playing very well indeed for Labour, David. Gallup's latest figures suggest that if you look at the four big issues, unemployment, the NHS, education, John Prescott, Stephen Dorrell were talking about these earlier, law and order, that's what it was like at the last election. There's the party in the lead on these issues in April 1992. Labour way ahead on unemployment and NHS, as Stephen Dorrell conceded, education, but the Tories ahead on law and order at the last election. What's happened now? Here we are in April 1996. Gallup's figures, way ahead Labour on unemployment, 50% ahead. NHS, 52% ahead Labour. Education, zooming ahead by 37% and turning the law and order issue round, and Labour now leading on law and order. Indeed, issues like tax and inflation, on which the Tories were ahead in April 92, it appears that Labour are now ahead on, according to Gallup. Another issue, another image, conceptual thing that is terribly important to the party images in the country. Back at the last general election, both parties looked roughly as united as the other. 51% said Labour looked united, 48% said the Tories looked united. Just look how that's split up now and damaged the Tories so very, very seriously in the years since that April election. Really, hardly any movement there at all in that huge gap. Today, only 12% saying the Tories look united, 47% saying Labour look united. So very damaging again for the Tories. And look at this one too, the party leadership stakes. In the House of Commons, the leaders have a huge advantage over Mr Major, the two opposition leaders, 64% saying that Mr Blair looks like a good leader of his party, 57% going for Penny Ashdown. Mr Major down there on 23%. He's been down in the low 20s now since time immemorial, really about the last couple of years. And you compare him with his predecessors, and Mrs Thatcher's worst when she was Prime Minister, 23% in April 90. She lost, of course, the party leadership very soon after that. There's 26%. Harold Wilson, August 69. That was his worst. He lost the election shortly after that. In Anthony Eden's case, 41% was his worst, and Winston Churchill's worst, 23%. He lost the leadership about a year after that. So there's Mr Major with 23%, and that isn't his worst. He's been down to 19%. So on all these issues and party images, looking very bad for the Tories at the moment, David.
Tony King, obviously a government in office does suffer unpopularity on a whole range of issues. Which are the ones that Peter mentions do you think are lastingly to the detriment of this government and put it in real risk at a general election? And which are ones that are, like the NHS, just ones that are there they have to live with?
Peter Snow used the word image, and I think image is the key word here. It's not the question of tallying specific issues, it's the overall kind of impression people have of the competence of an opposition party or the governing party. And one of the striking things about this by-election, I think, and it came out in the earlier discussion, was that, as John Prescott or somebody said, it was all issues, it was a mix of things. And what I think is very striking at the moment is that the things that were hurting the Conservatives hardest at the time, say, of the Dudley West by-election a couple of years ago, sleaze, increases in taxes, the continuing recession, the deep Conservative disunity over Europe, the constant carping at John Major's leadership. All of those things have gone away. There is nothing specific that people have against the government in the way they did at the VAT on fuel time or the poll tax time, and yet the government is doing very badly. And I think the reason for that is that people have made a judgment about the Labour Party having moved back into the centre of politics and made a judgment about the management competence of the government, especially since Britain's coming out of the ERM, and that there is something in the view that, whereas the early by-election defeats looked like, as it were, rows within the family, here I think we're beginning to see the end of the marriage between the Conservative Party and the majority of the British people.
And its supporters.
And its
who are not a majority of the British people, of course.
Well, the 42% or the 43%.
But Tony King, when you say that by-elections, you have all this sort of list of complaints from the electorate, whether it's Sleaze or John Major's leadership or whatever it is, come the general election, where does the economy and tax, in your opinion, rate? Because at the moment, on the kind of figures that the pollsters are producing, the NHS is at the top. But I mean, the NHS isn't going to be at the top in a general election, is it? Or is it?
Putting it very simply, I think for an opposition party to be elected, it has to persuade the voters that at the very least, it's not going to manage the economy worse than the incumbent government. And I think one of the Labour Party's great successes over the last couple of years has been to begin to persuade voters that if the Conservatives are making a mess of things, Labour at any rate won't make a worse mess of things.
So if the Chancellor is right in the feel-good factor, even if it hasn't come through today or yesterday in this by-election, is going to come through, do the Tory party still have a chance of winning a general election in a year from now?
I think they're going to find it very difficult. One little statistic, it takes a swing of only 0.8% to deprive the Conservatives of their overall majority. It seems to me that the chances of the Conservatives having a swing of less than that are very remote indeed.
John?
I think the difficulty we've got is that at the moment, Labour are something like 30 points ahead in the national opinion polls. Politicians in private are absolutely convinced that that will not be the position at the time of the general election. Once you're stuck with this 30 points lead in the opinion polls, all the figures that we're given about issues and everything else are affected by that, because it all starts off on the same premise. The great difficulty we've all got is that the question we want answered is the question of who should rule Britain. And when people start to concentrate on this, it's true, they may find the Conservatives wanting, but what seems very likely is you will not get this enormous lead that Labour have at the moment. This is certainly the view in private of Tony Blair himself, and certainly the view that there's no cause for complacency. I suppose what I think about recently, if you take Western European elections, you think of what happened to Monsieur Balladur in France, who was meant to be the dead cert to win the French presidential election. Mr. Chirac seemed to have messed things up by putting Balladur in as his prime minister. What happened? First of all, Chirac did come through. Then on the socialist side, they thought, what's the point of fighting this battle? Jacques Delors wouldn't stand. Why not have Lionel Jospin as the token leader of the Socialist Party? He came within 2 points of winning the presidency of the French Republic. Now, all this happened in the space of about 6 months. The opinion polls at every point were misleading the public, were misleading the commentators. Now, I'm not suggesting, therefore, by analogy you can say, oh, well, it'll all be different and there'll be an enormous change. But the truth is, we simply don't know. And certainly what is happening in Tamworth, as far as I could tell, is that people were not saying, I wonder what life would be like with a Labour government, and how will my particular interests be served or not served. They have plenty of complaints, and they're behaving as they're behaving towards the opinion pollsters by saying these are the things we dislike.
Okay, let's have a look at the feel-good factor through the polls. Can we do that?
Indeed, David, this rather reinforces what Tony King was saying earlier. When you look at the feel-good factor, this green line here, it does indeed show a climb. It is, in a sense, the feel-bad factor here, because we're still in a minus position rather than a plus position, the pessimists outnumbering the optimists. Once the feel-good factor moves above the line, that means more people think things are going to go well the next year than think things are going to go badly. But there it is, rising up there quite substantially over the past year. A little bit of a drop in the last 3 months. There's Gallup's latest figure, a -10 figure there. Now, why isn't that pulling up government popularity with it? Because here's the line, the blue line representing the Conservative position, the actual lag behind Labour right the way through that same period. A tiny improvement, you might say, -27 there behind Labour, 27 points behind Labour there, 24, 23 here, a small improvement, but not being pulled up at all substantially, as history suggests it usually is, by the feel-good factor, by consumer confidence recovering over that same period. So again, why isn't it happening? Maybe Tony King's right. People are just so disillusioned by this Conservative government that they really can't see any way of giving it the support. Look at disposable income. Now, is this something the Conservatives can rely on? The amount of money you take home pay after tax and inflation, so on, the real disposable income you have. Now, over the first 3 years of this government, it went up a little bit, but not very dramatically, not enough to make much difference to people. In the last year, 1995, it's gone up by 3%. That clearly hasn't had much effect on Conservative popularity. It may have affected consumer confidence. And can the Conservatives now expect, as they no doubt hope, that the outlook for real disposable income over the next 2 years, and here we have Goldman Sachs' forecast, plus 2.3 this year, plus 2.7 next year, will do much good for the Conservatives? Well, that's not going to be very dramatic assistance to them if that 3% didn't make very much difference in 1995. And then Tony King was also talking about this very important indicator here, which may well have been decisive in winning the Tories the last election. At the last election, in spite of all those pictures we've just seen of how the Labour Party were leading on the NHS, leading on unemployment and so on and so forth, the Tories were regarded by more people as fit to handle the economy efficiently than Labour. There was a 7% lead in Gallup at the last election in that area. But since then, look how it's changed. Again, that absolutely ruthless gap between Labour and the Conservatives. Labour are seen as likelier to run the economy well than the Conservatives. And so here you have it. Right now, a gap, still a dramatic gap of some 24 points between the Conservatives and Labour. And yes, it's narrowed now and again, but basically Labour have it there by a huge advantage.
So how do you explain all that, Stephen Dorrell?
Well, what I think, the most important point I think that's been made in the last few minutes is John Sargent's point about what's happened in other parts of the world, in governments facing very similar sets of circumstances. Actually, the closest parallel to our position is partly the French example that John quoted, partly also what happened about the time of the Dudley West by-elections. It happens in Germany, where Chancellor Kohl was re-elected. If you read all the German magazines 6 months before the German election at the end of 1994, it was simply taken as read that the Kohl era was coming to an end. Here was a man who'd been Chancellor for 13 years, his party was falling apart, his record post-German unification meant that he was completely unelectable. That was the conventional wisdom in Germany in the summer of 1994, and yet he was re-elected with a clear majority by Christmas of 1994. So there are numerous examples around the world of governments recovering from positions of massive mid-term unpopularity.
But you aren't in mid-term, are you?
Well, massive late-term unpopularity. The example I quote in Germany took place in 6 months. The disappearance of Mr. Balladur, who remembers who he was now. He was Prime Minister of France for 2 years. He disappeared without trace in the period of 6 months. And that's why I started off my answers to your questions this evening by stressing that I think what we need to be doing, if we want to have some sense of whether there is a resonance in the Tory vote, is looking both at the attitude of Tory and former Tory voters to Tory candidates, and there's, I think, general recognition by John Prescott as well as others that attitude is improving. And we also need to see, of course we need to see, that start to be converted into votes, and that's what we need to be looking for.
Nick Harvey, do you think the Conservatives can take comfort from Germany and France and say that the figures Peter Snow was showing of the divergence, again on the economy, for instance, doesn't actually matter, that it can all change?
I think they're scrabbling around rather desperately if they're going to cling to those examples. There are many more examples, if you look around the world, of long-term governing parties being slung out, the most recent being the Australian Labour Party, but parties to the right and the left have been pushed out all over the world. And this, I think, is probably a more relevant analogy, and I think that John Sargent was saying exactly what's going to happen, we don't know, and scientifically that must be right. He's demonstrating that it will be possible for a recovery to happen, yes, perhaps, but I have a strong gut feeling that wherever I go, people are saying, you know, we've had enough, we're going to put them out, and I didn't have this feeling last time around. I never believed that the Conservatives were going to lose in 1992. It was just so hard for them to do so, and I think that this time the commentators who go out and have talked to people in the course of these campaigns have seen the same thing, and it's just a question of when the day is going to come, and all this feel-good factor is nothing to do with it. What people are fearing is unemployment. If you look at the figures of the number of people who are fearing that they're going to lose their job within the next 6 or 12 months, that remains solidly high, and people aren't going to go out buying houses, buying cars, and doing the other things that the Tories are desperate to see happening, while they have this fear of unemployment.
And do you believe Labour can assuage that fear?
A fear of unemployment?
Yes.
No, but I think that those who have this fear of unemployment hold the incumbent government responsible for the economic circumstances that have brought it about.
How central, no, hold on a second, John Prescott, how central to Labour's plan to keep those trends going their way is this business of taxation, which we've been hearing about today from Tony Blair in Washington, with the reports that he wants to cut tax on everybody earning under £40,000 a year?
He didn't say that. He said the tax burden was too great. But I think the important point is that Tony Blair continues to want to show he's a party of change. And you can see that in many, many ways. And he's saying to the electorate, it's not the same Labour Party, it's a different Labour Party. And I'm sure that's reflected in all the ways that we as an opposition party, more than probably in any other country that's facing a government that's been in power so long, is so well ahead in policies, elections, polls, the things that Peter Snow was showing us there. That's very strong for an opposition party. But there's one factor that politicians don't like to talk about, but I think is an important part in people's minds, and yet again I heard it in this Tamworth file, South East Staffs, and we saw it in Australia. There's a feeling of time for change. If we look at Australia, for example, there it was a Labour government that came to power with the slogan, time to change. It was the Liberal Party in Australia, after 13 years, used the same slogan and put Labour out. There comes a time, I think, when the policies are not working well, that people have lost the confidence in the existing government, whether it's of the left or the right. Provided the opposition can appear to be competent, getting its case across, and is united, then time for change comes, reinforces that. But you cannot win on that slogan alone. The people have got to be convinced you can do a better job than the government, and I think that's what's happening with Labour. When you put all those things together, it's a total factor, and I think that's evident in Tamworth, and people are beginning to say, as in South East Staffs, beginning to say, it is time for change. This government, clearly a Labour government alternative, would be far better, and then it's shown in all the polls and all the results.
But you're sort of saying if you keep your noses clean, you're all right because you haven't been in
Well, I don't
such
think
a
it's a
long
matter
time
of noses clean. I mean, if we look at all the areas we've been talking about, the policies, the polls, the elections, etc., you can't just win these by just keeping your nose clean. You have to put forward your case, and that's why we've been showing on the policies why we're increasing. On health, it was what I was before. In all those areas, we're far better than we were at the last election.
But you still
we have a new leader, we have a new competence, and the electorates are reflecting that, and I think when they all bring together, it's a powerful demand for change.
But when you say that, you put it, I'd come back to this tax business. You say he didn't say that, but I mean, all the reports in the papers are that his aides are quoted as saying he'd like to reduce income tax for people earning less than £40,000, a very high level of earning to reduce income tax.
I mean, whatever the press are carrying. I mean, I've read the speech. I don't know whether you have.
Well, no, I'm saying what his aides are saying.
I can't answer for his aides who haven't got names. We hate aides who tell us they can't give us their names. But for God's sake, it's what Tony said in his speech. That's what we have to take into account, and it's there for us all to read. He did talk about reduction for those in the lower incomes, where he believes the tax level's been far too high, and Gordon Brown talked about the lowest rate at 10p.
So this stuff is all nonsense. Earners up to 40,000 will benefit. Earners up to 40,000 will benefit.
I heard
Blair to peg tax. It's all untrue.
He didn't say that.
He didn't say it.
Well, hang on a second. I heard Tony Blair on the radio as I was coming to the studio this evening, and he was indeed talking about people on top-rate tax, saying that he thought the people who are on 40,000 a year in the top rate tax bracket were paying a surprisingly high rate of tax. That was exactly the argument he was using.
Teachers and policemen
now, that's all very fine. But what those people who Tony Blair is identifying are going to want to know from Labour is what Labour has in prospect for them, and how, if they're going to cut those taxes, they're going to reconcile that with the ambitions they have for extra spending on health, extra spending on education, and all the other spending programmes that Labour is so fond always of hinting that will receive extra money.
First of all, he says that in his speech again, like every party says, and like yourselves, we'll wait for the appropriate time to make our recommendations on tax. But what we won't do is, we will not lie our way to victory. You see, the problem at the moment with this government, and we notice in South East Staffs, they feel betrayed because you told them you wouldn't increase tax. You told them you're a party of low taxes. It's totally untrue. It's not their experience, and that's why Ken Clarke, when he says this election will be about people feeling good and the prosperity of the economy, nobody believes Tory politicians anymore.
If you seriously believe you can go into the next election by keeping your nose clean...
I didn't say that.
Well, you did.
I didn't. I said there would be a statement at the appropriate time. That's clearly before an election. That's what Tony Blair said.
But what Tony Blair has said, according to what is reported in this speech, is that people at the 40% rate, some of them, will find their tax goes down. That's what people are poking fun at.
What he says, I'm going to tell you what he said in the speech. You're telling me what's reported about what his aide said.
No, I'm not. He said in the speech that, and he cited policemen, teachers,
he said,
as an example,
middle managers,
you know that
policemen and
teachers
are already in the highest level of tax in
Presumably they have to come out of it.
He was making a statement about
that. What's the point of telling them that if he's not offering them the prospect?
He's talking to American businessmen about the tax regime.
No, hold on, let's not all have it at once. So John Prescott,
was he talking to? To whom was he talking?
Are we seriously supposed to believe that Tony Blair goes on a high-profile, well-publicised visit to the United States a year before a general election has to be held in order to commune with a few American businessmen?
No,
is that what we're supposed to believe?
He talked to them about keeping that investment in Britain, about the fair levels of tax that Labour, dealing with all the lies that were put out about the Tories. You've got the Prime Minister saying that public expenditure and tax are like strawberries and cream with the Labour Party. I'm bound to say, from a Prime Minister who has increased his tax 22 times, a burden on families of 690, and actually lied at the election, saying, let me watch my lips, we will not increase VAT or tax. That was a lie, wasn't it?
But hold on, is Tony Blair then saying these people are paying too much tax, but they're going to go on paying too much tax?
He said he believes on a fair taxation, and before the election we'll state our position. He says that in his speech. Now, I don't know that necessarily the Tories, even before the November budget that's coming, will say what their tax position is, will you?
No, we have made it clear that we are in favour of controlling the growth of public spending in order to allow us to collect less tax. Now, what Labour
when will you do that then? When will you do that, by the way? Because you haven't done it for the last 4 years.
Are you saying that we've been spending more than we should have been?
No, what you're saying is that we haven't been
sufficient. No,
you haven't.
That isn't what I said. What I said was we shall control the growth of public spending in order to allow us to reduce tax. When did that happen? Now, are you saying we haven't reduced public spending by enough?
No, you're telling us that you're still maintaining higher levels of public expenditure and lower tax. That's your case.
One specific example. Peter Lilly has been, ever since he became Social Security Secretary, has been introducing a number of different changes designed to control the growth of the Social Security budget. Yeah, how many of those have you supported?
Well, how many increases in health expenditure have gone on? I mean, you're constantly telling us how you've increased the public expenditure in health.
I think we better go back to the by-election. But Nick Harvey, just a quick comment on what's been going on either side of you.
Well, I mean, if a Labour government comes in on a popular mandate, we're destined to turn back the damaging effects of 17 or 18 years of Conservative rule. That is going to cost money, and it will simply not be possible in the course of one Parliament, both to do the things that we'll need doing on education, on transport, housing, health, and a variety of other things, and give these people in these middle-income brackets a tax cut. It simply won't be possible to balance a book and achieve both those objectives.
OK, let's go back to the count at Tamworth, where Lance Price is sitting patiently waiting for the returning officer to come and give us the result. Lance, what's the position now?
Well, the latest information we've been given is that we can expect maybe a result in about 10 minutes' time. You may be able to see behind me the piles of votes on the tellers' tables. All the tellers, incidentally, are very well used to the job of handling little bits of paper. They're all bank tellers in real life when they're not doing this of an evening, from local banks recruited for this job. What we can see from those piles is that the Labour lead is indeed a substantial one. One person from neither of the two big parties, but somebody who's usually pretty good at adding up the figures, reckons a Labour majority well in excess of 10,000, but it shouldn't be that much longer before we know for sure.
OK, Lance, thank you very much indeed. Let's come back to our two resident experts here. You heard the argument going on about tax. Yes. John Sargent, first of all.
I think what's going on...
Who's telling the truth here?
Well, can I even give my version of it? I think what's happening is this, is that Tony Blair, quite rightly, realises that for Labour to succeed in this argument, or to have any chance of succeeding, they must change the terms of the argument. Now, what happened at the last election was that Labour were saddled with an image of being high taxing and high spending, and he's got to then try and make sure that before we get into the next general election campaign, Labour can say one thing at least about taxes, that for people who are on low incomes, he would like their taxes to fall. Now that strikes me as being very much typical of Tony Blair's approach. It is a way in which he changes the argument, puts it in a way that people can understand, and no doubt that message will be repeated a great deal between now and the election campaign, so that when he's asked a simple question, are you in favour of high tax or low taxes, he will be able to undercut your points, David, if you're interviewing him, by saying, I've made this clear for many months.
Yeah, but what about part two of the argument, which is quoted here as he's understood to feel people earning over 24,000, i.e. hitting the top rate of tax at 40%, should be given high priority in the lightening of the tax burden. The point Nick Harvey was making was it's not possible to do this and increase public spending.
Well, obviously that's where it becomes extremely difficult. The moment you look at the tax tables and you realise what happens and how much can you hope to get a significant increase in the tax take, you realise that the only way of doing it is to start hitting middle income earners. And it's very difficult to get large sums out of our tax system unless you do that. So the question,
and what about these,
unless you get more people
what
back
about
to
these
work,
Labour leaders' aides who were quoted as saying he'd like to reduce the income tax burden for people earning less than 40,000 in a significant policy? Do you believe that story?
Well, I think it may well be true that the aides are saying this.
Well, who are these aides?
Well, the reason I probably
Peter Mandelson?
I probably can name them. No, Miss Mandelson is not on this particular trip, but I could probably think who is on the trip. But no, I don't think we should reveal who the aides are.
They have gone around denying these things, of course, haven't they?
Well, the aides have already...
They're all saying there was misinterpretation of what was said.
Quite. But I think what
one person who's on the record on this subject is worth remembering is Gordon Brown, who is actually Shadow Chancellor, when asked to rule out a 60% tax rate as the top rate of tax, explicitly refused to do so. So at the same time, his leader, at the same time as his leader is hinting at tax reduction, the Shadow Chancellor is refusing to rule out 60%.
He said, I will not make any statement of tax until the appropriate time. Okay, what's so wrong about that?
Right, John,
even your Chancellor says the same thing.
I think let's not have two tables worth of discussion.
I think we've got to, just on this point, we are in the culture of the spin here. Now, what do aides want to say? Aides want to say tax is going down. That's a message. Aides are less keen on saying tax is going up. Now, it's quite simple that as far as I can gather, we are speaking about this from a very long way away across the Atlantic. But I'm not surprised that aides don't rather want to hint that it's going to be all right for these middle income earners, simply because they're an enormous number of voters, and they've got to be extremely careful not to get in the position they were at the last election, where they did all their figures. They worked out that most people would not lose by their tax proposals, but they also realised to their chagrin that most people thought they would lose. So it's that trap, it's that trap of presentation which they're trying to avoid this time.
Is this going to be a win or lose issue for Labour at the next election? I mean, it's obviously every time they talk tax, everybody gets in a great flurry about it, but is it going to count on election day?
I think it could well count, but it's more likely to count, I think, less in terms of people doing the tax tables than in having an overall sense of whether they're likely to be better off or worse off under a Labour or Conservative government. And clearly the discussion we've been hearing at the other end of the studio makes it quite clear what the name of the game is going to be. The Conservatives will be in the business of trying to put the frighteners on voters, persuading them that their taxes will go up under Labour, and Labour is going to be providing endless reassurance.
Because it doesn't matter what happens to the majority, does it? It's targeting the people who might switch from Tory to Labour. I mean, of course, there are going to be lots of Labour voters who may well be better off, but they're safe Labour voters anyway. There are a lot of people who will vote Tory, come hell or high water, whatever they're told about tax. So it is this critical range around £23,000–25,000 earners that are the problem.
But to repeat, it's not, and wasn't in 1992, just a matter of tax. It's tax as part of a bundle of things.
Right.
After all, you won't mind your taxes going up if you think your income is going to go up enormously. Tax cuts of a very small sort won't make much difference. And I don't think the present Chancellor's tax cuts are making much difference because they don't loom large in people's incomes.
Okay. I'm keeping an eye on the count at Tamworth in the school hall where not a lot is going on at the moment. So just before we go, we think another 5 minutes or so we may get the result from there. But Peter, let's have a look at the government's popularity, or should we call it government's unpopularity?
Indeed. Well, now, as we draw nearer the moment, we'll discover how the parties have done in Tamworth. It might be worth reminding you of the national picture. We've had a lot of talk about the polls. Here's what the polls are actually saying. The unadjusted figures, so these are the raw figures from the polls, give Labour a huge lead right over the period from January 94 right up until today. There it is, going up, and January 95 is an even bigger lead than there was in January 94. Way up there, there's all 35%, and it's gone up and down ever since then. But there really isn't any discernible sense in which the Tories are drawing much closer to Labour. There's the odd blip here when they seem to come together. Last autumn, the Tories started getting rather excited, but then it's really opened out again, and there's really very little in it. There are the latest figures from Gallup suggesting a 30% lead in the unadjusted figures in the polls. Now, the pollsters also offer us adjusted figures. These are to allow for any shyness that Conservative supporters, they reckon, may have in admitting that they're going to vote Conservative. Now, but even when you show those adjusted figures, you still get this huge gap, and this is really quite unprecedented in British electoral history, or the history of polling. This huge gap between the Conservatives and Labour, whether or not, of course, as John Sargent was rightly saying, you believe it. Nevertheless, that is what they are saying they will do when the general election comes. Now, we then have several measures by which to judge the public status of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. You've seen the Liberal Democrats down the bottom there on 15 or 16%. They're simply not at the moment in the race nationally, according to the polls. Now, here we have the Conservative with a majority, estimated majority on the new boundaries of 27 in the existing Parliament. We have to start from that basis. Here are the vulnerable Labour MPs to a Conservative swing, the vulnerable Conservative MPs to a Labour swing there. What do Labour need for an overall majority? The answer is just over 4%. That would turn, and you probably notice them changing colour, 55 of these blue figures here, red, and that would give Labour a majority of just one in the new Parliament. Now, here is the very least that the polls are suggesting is the swing to Labour. Now, this is the 11% swing in the latest ICM adjusted poll. Complicated, but it's a fact that ICM just very heavily for the way people voted last time. They're very concerned about the shyness they reckon people have in admitting they're going to vote Conservative. An 11% swing in ICM. Now, you then have a band of choice between that 11% swing in the ICM poll. You remember we talked about local government by-elections, a 14% swing in local government by-elections, real votes suggesting a Labour majority of something like 200 if that were translated into a general election. And right at the top of the scale is the latest Gallup unadjusted, the raw figures in Gallup, something like a 30% lead, suggesting a 19% swing to Labour. So there you have it, a huge band of possible outcomes. That would be a Labour majority of some 300. Incidentally, if that were the swing in the general election, then one Tory in a pretty safe seat, he's just taken hold of it, 22,600 his majority was, we estimate, in the last election in Charnwood, a new seat, Stephen Dorrell, he would have a majority of something like a few hundred if there was a 19% swing in the general election.
You're too kind to
kept
say.
His old seat,
you're too kind to say that he doesn't believe the Tories are going to win the election and left his old seat.
Yeah.
Because he thought he'd be defeated there on a swing of what, 3.5%?
Not actually true to say. I left it. It was divided in two. The Charnwood seat is half
come on,
my
give
own
it on the chicken run.
Oh yes, Stephen Dorrell did absolutely the sensible thing. Any politician would have done exactly the same thing in his position.
But he could have stayed there where his skills would be needed.
He stayed in
There's
lots of sensible Tory MPs at the moment skipping out of seats. Mulwiney, in fact, if we get anything less than, I think he needed about 5% actually to have held his seat in Peterborough, but he shot off to Cambridge now, so he'll be...
What percent of your present constituency remained in the constituency you've abandoned?
There were two new constituencies.
No, I know the answer. What is the answer?
And I selected...
No, what is the answer of how much is
the
left?
one that... I think the answer is that I take with me around 30%.
You abandoned 78% of your present constituency.
Around 30% of my new constituency is my current voters.
Well, that doesn't make 78 deducted from 100.
Well, that's why your mathematics is wrong, because around 30% of my new constituency currently...
This useful word around, I think, which makes the difference.
Within 1%.
Right. Anyway, well, we're waiting for this result. It's 2:15, and up there, they're still piling up. Lance, are you up there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, what's going on?
Well, they've been checking on one or two last spoiled papers, and when there's been some argument over whether or not the vote has been cast one way or the other. But the agents have been called in to do that. We're still expecting a result relatively soon.
What's that thing doing behind you?
That is one of the candidates in this by-election. He works for a rival television station, but if you'd like me to tell you his name is News Bunny. He's very pleased to be on the BBC, because even at this time of night on the BBC, he's got a larger audience than he'll ever get on his own channel.
I thought he'd been arrested today and was in police custody.
He was arrested today and was put into police custody, but for some reason they let him out again.
I also gather it's the first time he's been able to appear in public since he took the wrong decision to run in the by-election because he didn't understand the Representation of the People's Act.
Exactly right, yes.
He was removed from the television screen for the duration.
They would be able to use him for publicity, but then they realised that they had to take him off the air because otherwise they'd have had to put all the other candidates on the air as often as he was. So it wasn't such a good idea in the end, was it?
So they had to resort to having the Princess of Wales kissing various people for their publicity stunts. In the meantime. Now, anyway, come on, let's get away from that.
Enough of them.
Yeah, back to this business. How much longer are we going to wait before we get the result?
Well, you always feel rather embarrassed sitting here because you feel slightly responsible every time you have to come back on and say that it's not going to be at the time you said it was going to be last time you were here. Last time I was on, I said it would be about now. Well, it isn't, but it'll be another, I would guess, 10 to 15 minutes, but don't blame me when it's not.
I have a theory that returning officers and those involved in the party machinery in these places deliberately say that the result's going to come out round about 1 o'clock, then let it slip to 1:30, then 2, then 2:15, then 2:30, so that the word Tamworth is mentioned as often as possible during a by-election programme. And we see lots of shots of the count.
They're already very disappointed here because originally the count wasn't going to be in this building. The count was going to be in a fantastic building just down the road, which featured briefly in the film we showed earlier on, where the Europe's only indoor real snow ski slope is to be found. And that was where the count was going to be. There could have been lovely, pretty shots of people skiing at the same time and swimming, until the police came along and said that they would have to close the whole thing. And Tamworth Council, although they wanted publicity for their fantastic leisure facilities, weren't prepared to forego the loss of revenue that would have involved. So we're here at this school in the north of the constituency instead, I'm afraid.
John Prescott was saying earlier that he wanted to ski down that and his aides wouldn't let him because of the thought of the shots if he fell over. But anyway, thanks very much, Lance. That's very, very helpful.
Fall over. That's terrible.
What were they worried about? They just didn't think you looked so
getting a good picture of me, I think.
Right. Let's turn to another issue in this campaign, and one that does affect everybody. And you, Stephen Dorrell, have been one of those most involved in it. We heard in the film a bit about BES and CJD. How much of a factor do you believe that was in this campaign? Not because of it being a rural area, but because of a feeling at the time that the government wasn't handling the thing as deftly as it might.
I certainly got no sense when I was there that it was an issue that has had a party political effect. Clearly, there's a great deal of concern about it. There's a declining level of concern, but there has been a great deal of concern about it.
About the linkage, you mean?
About the linkage and about the reaction to that news. I don't myself believe that the government could or should have handled it any differently. I believe we were given information in which we had a duty to make available to the public. and we set out that information in as clear and as unambiguous a way as we could.
Why do you say there's a declining level of concern about it? There's no reason for a declining level of concern, is there?
Well, simply that people are buying beef.
But
We started off with a huge reaction against beef in the shops. And if you talk to any retailer, whether in the small butcher sector or in the supermarket sector, I think there's clear evidence that the public are going back to buying beef, and it isn't just a matter of cut-price beef now. Beef is being sold full price and sold in significant volumes.
What about the government's failure to put forward a clear-cut policy that the farmers can understand for slaughter and compensation if slaughter takes place? As we heard only today, they're all over the place saying you can't make up your minds what you're going to do, and why don't you make up your minds and tell us?
We've set out very clearly what we're going to do. We set it out several days ago now, 10 days ago. We've removed meat over 30-month-old from the human food chain. We've made it clear that we're considering the detail of a compensation package for farmers around that. But as far as the beef consumer is concerned, beef sold in British shops today is all below 30 months old.
But why are all the farmers complaining they're going broke feeding animals that they can't send to slaughter? They're on the Today programme every morning, as I'm sure you know, saying it's costing me £250 to feed my herd. I can't get any money for them.
Well, the return of confidence that I talk about hasn't been total. It's there and it's developing, and the markets are once again busy. But what we clearly need to see is that continuing, and the government is working for a return of confidence in the beef product in this country, and B, to get our partners elsewhere in Europe to recognise that the reaction that they introduced with their ban on our exports is not justified on any scientific basis whatever.
Do you think the scientists may have got it wrong, and there isn't the link that you first revealed?
I never said that there was. What I said was that on the advice of our scientists, the most likely explanation of a new phenomenon was this link. But
do you still believe it yourself?
But the scientists, as I've said all the way through, I'm not a scientist.
But you must have a view. I mean, you're a father, you're an eater of beef. Do you have a view?
I have a view, which is that beef is safe. Professor Patterson has been at pains to say, he's the chairman of this group of scientists, that there is no proven link. But in the absence of a better explanation, this is the most likely explanation.
Nick Harvey, do you think it's been handled well by the government and is still being handled well in the way Stephen Dorrell suggests?
No, I think for Stephen Dorrell as a health minister to say that the government's position is clear may be satisfactory to him, but for the farming and food industry, there is a state of complete paralysis. People are in a state of absolute desperation, waiting to see what is going to happen. The government has advanced a policy on animal slaughter that nobody believes is either justifiable or tenable, or indeed that they're really going to actually do it. And yet we've got a situation where beef that has been fattened and is ready for the market is not able to go onto the market, and the knock-on consequences are absolutely devastating for rural parts of the country. And there is a desperate desire to see the government actually get on and do something positive, which would have given them the initiative when they were negotiating with the European partners, rather than going to Europe in a rather a dithery fashion, and in some senses giving the initiative to the European community to start making demands. Well, they would have done better to have settled, as the NFU, as others said in the beginning, on taking out of the food chain and indeed slaughtering the animals that were around when the now banned offal was around. That's to say, taking out animals 5 or 6 years old and beyond. That, I think, farmers would have accepted. They would have understood that there was a logic to it. It would have taken out a manageable proportion of the herd, and I think that the public would have seen that was taking out the only thing that we really know about that could possibly be a risk. By saying that they want to take out animals 30 months old, they've got the entire agriculture industry in a state of panic. Nobody really believes that that's justified. If they do it, there's going to be absolute rack and ruin in the rural parts of the country. And I can see Stephen Dorrell pulling faces. I just don't think the government understand the depth of the despair that is being felt in the rural areas. And they are waiting to see this government come out with a plan that is believable, that's justifiable. And they really think that after a fortnight, this plan ought long since to have come.
John Prescott, given that the scientific evidence seems to be slim at the moment, and that people are talking about killing animals to restore confidence, not for any particular scientific reason, as I understand it, rather like the French killing their admirals, or the British killing their admirals to encourage the others, in Voltaire's words. I mean, do you support this policy of killing animals off and the taxpayer paying for them? Do you think the government's got it right, or could they have done something quite different?
The opposition have put different policies forward. In fact, I think both the Liberals and ourselves have had a similar proposal put forward. I think what we found in the by-election, it was the uncertainty that caused the problems. You mentioned the Today programme. I heard the EEC Commission, I think, saying today that we just don't know what the government's policy is still yet, whether it is in fact a cull at this level or whatever the different proposals. And funny enough, during this by-election, Gavin Strang came down and there was this campaign about Save Flo, which is a prize cow apparently, and it was great uncertainty.
We saw Flo in the film.
Yeah, well, they are in a way, and the people themselves are more, because they're concerned about the safety and health matters, but I think it was the uncertainty created by the government's non-action, if you like, that's created the problem, and that still continues. And that's an element of competency about government, you know, giving assurance to people that they're handling the matter properly. And I think that's what's at the heart of the beef crisis, whatever these arguments about the scientists and whether the government feels right in its policies or not going as far as perhaps we might have advocated. At the end of the day, it's shown a level of incompetency and uncertainty that's fed the fear both in the farming industry, the livelihoods of those of the people connected to it, and just shows a government not sure what to do.
You think Stephen Dorrell handled it badly?
Well, I think he's gone through a difficult period. I mean, he's the health minister and at the same time the agriculture one, and I think when he, for example, made that statement saying it's only a minor threat, I think many of his statements after that were, in fact, to be more reassuring, if you like. I think he's had a difficult job, and I think the government haven't handled it well, and he's carried the can for it.
Okay. Let's turn to a different subject while we wait for this by-election to come through, it now being 225. Which is going to affect this general election, which was something that Tony Blair was saying today, which, not about tax, which the Liberal Democrats were complaining about, which was that the Labour Party was now the party of the centre as well as of the centre-left. In other words, that the Liberal Democrats implicitly no longer held the centre ground, that Labour had adopted the centre ground. Is that right? Is it true? And will it damage you?
I think it's part of a rain dance that Tony Blair has been carrying on for several months. I don't know whether it's one that John Prescott approves of, but clearly he's been trying to say to the voters and say to the Liberal Democrats and indeed say to his own party that the days of adversarial politics should be over and that cooperation is the way forward. And I think that it's in that context that I interpret his remarks, rather than as being some savage attack on the Liberal Democrats or some desire to push us out of our ground. He talks about a new pluralist politics, and I think that one should interpret his remarks in that way.
Why should anyone want to vote Liberal Democrat anymore, given what Tony Blair is saying the Labour Party stands for? I mean, it's almost impossible to tell any difference, and he, after all, has a chance of forming a government, which you don't.
People have to decide, you know, to what extent they think Labour has changed. They have to make their own assessment of Labour policies, and they'll hear Liberal Democrats taking up positions on education issues just this week, on environmental issues, on constitutional issues, which are different to the Labour Party positions. In some cases, they'll see us prepared to go further and be bolder, and I think that this will have a universal appeal. Then, apart from that, people will look at the arithmetic in the individual seats that they happen to live in, and will consider which is going to be the more effective way of using their vote at the election. And we know that there are many seats where Liberal Democrats are in prime position, close on the heels of the Conservatives, and if people are foolish enough to vote Labour in those seats, they will wake up to find they still have a Conservative
Are they both
MP.
still a threat to the Conservatives?
I think what we've seen actually over the last few months between Labour and the Liberal Democrats is a quite extraordinary show where Tony Blair's been clearly making a pitch for the Liberal Democrat vote. And the Liberal Democrat leadership, Paddy Ashdown in particular, seems to be saying, here are our votes, please take them. The desire of Paddy Ashdown to present himself as a sort of wholly owned subsidiary of the Labour Party seems to me to be moving away from the view that Liberal leaders have taken right through my adult lifetime of maintaining some equidistance between the two major parties and try to establish a distinctive position in the middle. Paddy Ashdown's view seems to be that the more he cuddles up to Tony Blair, the more Tony Blair will like him. What Tony Blair's going to do is to eat him for breakfast.
The last big by-election, they were fighting like cats in a sack.
Yeah, but there's very much the exception. Look at what they're saying in terms of their national stance on electoral reform, on the whole variety of issues. I think that Paddy Ashdown is running huge risks with his vote and that Tony Blair sees that and sees it as an opportunity for Labour. It's clearly also an opportunity for the Tory party, because there are plenty of people who are long-term supporters of the Liberal Democrats who voted Liberal Democrat because they're just as hostile to Labour as they are to us. And if they think the leader of the Liberal Democrats is handing them over to Labour, then they're available to support us.
Well, that's a rather different point from the one Nick Harvey was making. I mean, he was saying Blair was camping on his ground, not that they were happy to have him there.
Well, Blair clearly sees the Liberal Democrat vote as potential Labour supporters, and he's coming to get them. Paddy Ashdown is not resisting. What I'm saying is that if you're a Liberal Democrat supporter and don't want to support Labour, then vote Tory, because supporting the Liberal Democrats won't achieve your result.
Tony King, put yourself in John Major's position at number 10, and you're looking at these two parties. What's the ideal for you in terms of winning a general election?
Well, what would be ideal would be for me to say exactly what my predecessors in number 10 said. Previous Conservative chairmen have said, don't vote Liberal Democrat, because if you vote Liberal Democrat, you will let Labour in. The trouble is that at this very moment, the evidence suggests very strongly that most people who back the Liberal Democrats wouldn't mind if Labour got in. And that's precisely the basis on which you see this snuggling up that Stephen Dorrell's referred to between the Liberal Democrats and Labour. The Liberal Democrats' great hope at the next election must be that, although their national vote will probably fall as Liberal Democrat supporters move back to Labour, they will nevertheless gain a significant number of seats, because their smaller vote will be much more effectively concentrated in certain parts of the country. That's what the Liberal Democrats want, that's what the Labour Party wants, hence this curious kind of informal, non-existent pact, and that's of course what John Major fears.
Can you show us, Peter, the effect of this non-existent informal pact, or
it gives me a chance to show you something that will really give you a great fillip at this late hour of the night, our new battleground, which will carry us through from now until the general election. Now, these are the 115 seats that the Liberal Democrats, the Plaid Cymru Party and others are chasing the Conservatives in all over the country. 115 key Conservative defence points all over the country, clustered, as you can see, around London, the South East, the Midlands and the North West, except, interestingly, there is a great cluster there of marginal Conservative seats down in the southwest, as the Liberal Democrats are chasing. Now, we're representing from now on these Conservative defence points, these vital seats for the Conservatives, by height. The higher they are, the bigger the majority in this Parliament on the estimated majorities on the new boundaries. So here, for example, Michael Forsyth in Stirling with a majority of 200 at the last election with a tiny little tile. Here is the Conservative majority in Salisbury of 9,000, represented by a rather higher pile. Now, this is a sort of staircase, really, for the opposition to climb. From the easy ones down here, Vale of Glamorgan, number 1, here's Stirling, number 8 in the pile here, and so they go on up the staircase until you get to Salisbury up here, the most difficult of those 115 seats for the opposition to turn red or yellow or whatever the colour of the opposition party that's challenging the Conservatives. There is that wall of blue then, and the basic challenge for the Labour Party is to win half of those seats. If Labour wins 57 net gains in the next general election, Labour has won, period. That's an overall majority of 1 for Labour. 57 plus, and they've got a comfortable majority. Now, on the basis of the local government by-election swing that we talked about earlier, the 14% in the local government by-elections, somewhere in between the adjusted swing of 11% in ICM and that big 19% in Gallup, so perhaps the ballpark figure of 14% may be roughly right when people are asked the question, how would you vote in the general election tomorrow? This is what would happen in these vital Conservative seats, and it just illustrates how desperately the Conservatives are placed. Every single one of them would go down to the opposition parties, SNP picking up seats in Scotland, Liberal Democrat seats in the southwest, and the Labour Party, of course, most of the seats, something like 2/3 of them, going to Labour.
Yeah, so you're suggesting that there'll be a combined squeeze on the Tories. And what are these Liberal Democrats?
The reason the Liberal Democrats are gaining is
mainly West Country ones.
Yes, mainly because that's where they're challenging the Tories, mainly in the West Country, because the Liberal Democrat vote is down less, the support for the Liberal Democrats is down less than the Tories, there is an effective swing to the Liberal Democrats. And so the Tory vote dropping something like 17% in terms of support, The Liberal Democrats down by 2-3%. That's a swing to the Tories, which would see the Liberal Democrats gaining quite a few seats.
John Prescott, you want to come in?
I don't think this is reflecting one of the serious developments that have taken place in politics of late, particularly under Tony Blair, is that we actually see not the Tories going to Liberals, we actually see a switch directly to Labour, missing out the Liberals. And if you look at Littleborough and Saddleworth, we can assume the Liberals got all their votes. They didn't increase as many, but they retained it. Yet we had a swing of 17.3%. That is, a lot of Tories have been switching. That's what's going to be evident, I fear, in this by-election. It's a very important factor. It's why centre-left and centre is actually combined by Tony Blair and that speech. Switches are an important part in the electoral situation now.
John Sargent, do you agree with that?
I think this is a significant point that John Prescott is making. This is very much part of New Labour's tactics, that if you're going to win the next election, you must get Tory voters, former Tory voters, to vote Labour. The battle will always be in the centre ground. Where do you find those switches? In the centre. What's interesting is if you compare what both Mr Major and Mr Blair have said about their positions in the last 6 months. Mr Major says the Tories are a party of the centre and the centre-right. Mr Blair has now said we are a party of the centre and the centre-left. But both of them realise, because they're more and more aware of the advice being given to them behind the scenes, that this is where the battle has got to be taken to the other side, and Mr Blair and Mr Major are squaring up for the general election.
I'm keeping an eye on Tamworth, where the candidates, there are 13 candidates in all in Tamworth. I don't know whether we can just show the pictures there, can we, of what's going on in Tamworth? Yes, there we are. They were just about to come on to the platform. You can see the returning officer will go to the centre there. There are 13 candidates. They're the usual kind of confusion of candidates. Daily loony lugs earing up the world. I mean, incomprehensible titles. Action Against Crime, Life Means Life. The official monster raving loony party with Lord David Such, needless to say, is there. The Churchill Conservative Party, the Natural Law Party, the Liberal Party is there, as well as the Liberal Democrats, and the ones we'll be watching for: Jimmy James for the Conservatives, Brian Jenkins for Labour. Conservative majority here at the general election for Sir David Lightbarn, who was the Tory whip, who died suddenly, aged 63. Conservative majority of 7,192, a swing of 6.25% needed for Labour to take the seat. The rumour has it that the majority is going to be 10,000 or so. So we'll keep an eye on that and keep our conversation going here. We've been told another 5 minutes, at least 6 minutes ago, so I take all of this with a pinch of electoral salt. Tony King.
Two thoughts. One is John Prescott is absolutely right in what he said earlier on. The Gallup poll for the Daily Telegraph did a study of lost Tories recently, and we spent several weeks looking at people who admitted to having voted Conservative last time, now said that they were not going to vote Conservative, or at any rate didn't give a Conservative voting intention. And a very large proportion of those people indeed had switched right over to Labour, more than said they'd switched to the Liberal Democrats. But there is one general point that I think needs to be made about all this. If you go back and look at the graphs that Peter Snow had up about 3/4 of an hour ago about people's views about the economy, did you notice how many of those graphs crossed at one point, with Labour behind up to the crossing point and the Conservatives Labour ahead after the crossing point? And what's the explanation for that? We've not mentioned on this programme the evening of the 16th of September 1992. And I think that that evening, even though probably many viewers won't know precisely what the reference is to, Britain's being chucked out of the European exchange rate mechanism, I think that was a very important night in British political history. Putting it very crudely, one of the Conservatives' great strengths over many generations has been the very widespread feeling among the British public that you might like the Tories, you might dislike them, you might share their values, you might not share their values, but they at least were men of affairs. They were solid managers. They could run the country. They could run the economy. These were people you deferred to, because these were the people who had traditionally run the country. And one of the things that I think has happened, and seriously happened, to the Conservative Party since the April 1992 election is that that reputation for solid underlying competence has been, to put it bluntly, shot to hell.
But in your survey, which you carried on Tuesday from Gallup, they didn't mention the ERM, did they? They mentioned taxation, but they don't actually mention the ERM as one of the reasons for their disaffection from the Tory party.
Well, we didn't ask them specifically about the ERM. They weren't given a chance to do that.
But if it's so important, why weren't they asked?
But can I give you a very
no, but
simple...
sorry, if you say it's the most important thing, why weren't they asked it?
Because I don't think most people attribute their sense that the Conservatives are no longer as good managers as they were.
We'll interrupt you now for the declaration. I'm sorry, Tony. Let's go up to Tamworth now and get the declaration of these 13 figures. News Bunny first.
As follows. News Bunny, official News Bunny party, 85. Jeanette Margaret Davey, Liberal Democrat, 2,042. Sharon Jane Edwards, National Democrat, 358. Timothy David Richard James, the Conservative Party candidate, 12,393. Brian David Jenkins, the Labour Party candidate, 26,000. If I may give you the figure in full, 26,155. David John Lucas, Natural Law Party, 53. Stephen Joseph Mountford, the Liberal Party candidate, 332. Tony Samuelson, Daily Loony Lugs, Earring Up the World, 80. Frederick Joseph Sandy, Action Against Crime, Life Means Life, 53. Andrew Leslie Wilson Smith, the UK Independence Party candidate, 1,272. Lord David Such, official monster raving loony party, 506.
Hey! I've been robbed! Definitely been robbed.
All right. Leslie John Tucker, Churchill Conservative Party, 123. Alan Stephen Wood, Democratic Restoration of the Death Penalty, 45. The number of ballot papers not accepted was 23. I declare that the person duly elected to serve as member for the South East Staffordshire constituency is Brian David Jenkins.
So there's the result. A majority of 13,762, over 20% swing, it seems, from Conservative to Labour. Brian Jenkins takes the seat, 26,155. The Conservative, 12,393, Jimmy James. The Liberal Democrats on 2,042, and others 2,902. Let's hear from the victor.
The people of Britain, and said, we no longer trust the Tories. They are turning to Labour and our positive policies to give our country a fresh start. This tremendous victory has cut the Tory majority in the House of Commons to just one. It makes an autumn general election look more likely. And believe me, the message on the doorstep is that we need a general election, and the sooner the better. With increasing desperation, Tory ministers have been searching for the elusive feel-good factor. Well, I've got news for them. I can tell them how they can make us all feel good. Mr. Major should get into his government car, drive to Buckingham Palace, and tell Her Majesty, we've tried, we've failed, we're off. That would bring the feel-good factor back to Britain. Our victory here in South East Staffordshire shows there really are no no-go areas for New Labour. The Tories can't dismiss this as a mid-term blues or a protest vote. The result is the clearest sign yet that Labour is now the party of the mainstream majority. One of the first things I shall do in the House of Commons next week is to represent that mainstream majority of Britain by casting my vote against the privatisation and break-up of our national rail system. And now for some thank yous. Firstly, Mr. Returning Officer, I would like to thank you and your staff for the efficient way in which the polling and count have been conducted. I would also like to thank the police.
Right, well, there's the victor, Brian Jenkins for Labour, with a majority of 13,700. Let's see how the overall result went. The Liberal Democrats lost their deposit, but let's have a look at the swing, Peter.
Right, well, here it is again then, the result. Just to remind you again, there's the votes, 26,155 for Labour, completely turning it around. 12,393 the Tories, something like a third of their vote before, 2.5 times less than they had before. The Liberal Democrats down on 2,000, they had 5,000 last general election. A 13,000 majority for Labour. And the share of the vote, 60% of the vote going to Labour, 28% the Conservatives, 7% the others, and the Liberal Democrats down there on 5%. The changes that represents on the general election last time, plus 22 percentage points for Labour, down 22% the Conservatives. That's a straight swing of 22% from Conservative to Labour. That is not quite as big as the swing in Dudley West, nor is the swing as big as the swing in Barking and Dagenham. In fact, a couple of years ago, but it's still one of the biggest Labour swings ever, from Conservative Labour swings ever. The Liberal Democrats down 5% and up 5% the others. And so looking back then, we remember what Stephen Dorrell said earlier in the programme at the Conservative performance in a number of contests in this Parliament. There's the 43% they had in the last general election. They were down 15% in the European elections in 1994. They were down, their share of the vote was down 30% in Dudley West. There's a 29% swing there in Dudley West, a drop of 30% in the Conservative vote in Dudley West. That was indeed the worst Conservative drop ever in a fight with Labour. 18% down in the local elections last year. That was a disastrous result for the Conservatives in the local elections last year. In local by-elections, they appear to be on the national projection down 13%. And in opinion polls, adjusted opinion polls, down 13% on that 43% in the general election. And now, here's Staffordshire South East, a drop of 22%. 22%, rather worse than many of those other ones, but not as bad as the one in Dudley West in 1994, December 94. So there's the picture. Not hardly an improvement in the Conservative performance in terms of contests recently, but nevertheless not quite as bad as what happened in Dudley West 15 months ago. David.
Tony King, then, a brief comment on this. Stephen Dorrell was saying any improvement on Dudley. Well, this is an improvement, but it's not much of an improvement, is it?
Oh, this is a smashing victory for the Labour Party and really a stunning defeat for the Conservatives. Dudley West was rather a fluke. It was absolutely at the nadir of the government's fortunes. I don't think anybody seriously thought that the 29% of Dudley West was going to be repeated in Staffordshire South East. A swing of 22% is absolutely massive by historical standards. And to repeat something I said earlier, the remarkable thing is that there is no particular issue. It's people's rating of the two parties at this moment in time.
Okay, well, let's now join the leader of the Labour Party, Tony Blair, who's in Washington. So, Mr. Blair, you were right. God is on Labour's side.
Well, it was certainly a stunning result. And I think what it shows is not merely that the Conservatives are discredited, and indeed have been humiliated by this result, but it also shows the growing trust that there is, the growing sense of trust between today's Labour Party, New Labour, and the British people. And that is a very good sign, not just for us, but more particularly for the country.
What do you make of the reports that have been here all day today that you want to have massive reductions in taxation? It was thought, perhaps you said this because there was a by-election on, and you wanted cuts in tax for everyone earning under £40,000. Is that the truth? It's what your aides are reporting as having said.
What I actually said was in the speech today and was very clear indeed. And of course, people have seen their taxes go up very considerably under the Conservatives. And I was pointing out to people that, in fact, they've brought a lot more people into the top rate tax band, so that even policemen and teachers and middle managers will be paying top rate of tax.
But are you saying they'll stay there, or is it Labour policy that those people will come out of the higher rate of tax?
Well, David, as I think Gordon Brown said, and I myself repeated in my speech, we will make any proposals that we have on tax clear in our manifesto.
So this is a kind of taxation muzak that's played to soothe the electorate until you actually come up with the real figures?
Well, I don't know what you mean by that, actually, but what I said in the speech was very clear.
Well, what I mean by that is that it's easy to say we think these people are overtaxed, but if you don't then say we're going to reduce the taxation on them, it doesn't actually mean very much.
Well, I think it does actually mean something quite significant, because you are drawing attention to the types of people that are paying the tax rates under the Conservators, and therefore you are drawing attention to the fact, as you probably know, that the Conservators have actually imposed the largest tax rises in peacetime history. And to return, if we may, just for a moment to the by-election, I think that one of the reasons why the Conservators did so badly in the by-election is that people feel a very deep sense of betrayal, not just over tax, but over crime, over education, over the National Health Service. What I think is important about this result, though, is that it also shows that the Labour Party is trusted as the centre of British politics, as a one-nation party, as a party that is capable of bringing Britain together and allowing us together as a country to prepare for the huge economic and technological challenges of the future. Now, that positive result for Labour is, I think, as important as the obviously extremely negative result for the Conservatives.
Well, you've certainly been saying in the United States that business can trust Labour and go on investing in Britain as they're doing at the moment, maybe more. In that context, was it right of Gordon Brown not to rule out 60% top tax rates? Does that hang together with your view of a competitive economy to invest in?
David, what he actually said was that the proposals on tax in a Labour manifesto would be made at the proper time. The areas of concern to business here were obviously to know what the Labour Party's proposals were going to be for business, and I think it has been successful in that regard. I would also say to you that I think there are large numbers of business people who aren't simply looking for reassurance from today's Labour Party. They actually believe that the Labour Party could be better for business, and that is one of the things that I've been emphasising.
You now have a Conservative government in the House of Commons with a majority of one. How long do you believe they can sustain themselves in office?
I really don't know. There is very little happening so far as government is concerned. The business of government has almost been shut down. They are obviously going to cling on as long as they can, but there is no sense of purpose, there is no direction, there is drift, there is very weak leadership. And I do really believe that it's in the interest of the country to get a government with some purpose and direction so that the country itself can move forward and meet some of the challenges that it faces. Now, David, if you forgive me, I think I'm going to have to go back into the reception.
Thank you very much for joining us. Just one last thing before you go.
Surely.
Would you call on everybody then, Ulster Unionists and the rest, at the first possible opportunity to try and put forward a vote of confidence and vote this government out of office?
Well, of course, if an opportunity presents itself to remove this government, then it is not merely our opportunity, it is our duty as an opposition to try and remove them, and we will do that as soon as we possibly can. When that opportunity may present itself, I simply don't know. But I think there is a very, very broad feeling, which this result shows. I mean, remember, this is a by-election the Conservatives said they were going to win. This was a by-election in which they said the feel-good factor was going to sweep their candidate to power. Now, they have had a defeat far worse, I think, than anyone was anticipating until this evening. And, of course, I think that it indicates a certain mood within the country, a mood in the country for change and for ideas and for energy and for direction back in the country. So if a chance presents itself in order to move that process forward in the interests of the country, we will, of course, take it.
Mr. Blair, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
Stephen Dorrell, is it far worse than you expected, as Tony Blair was saying?
First of all, it's a good result to Brown Jenkins, and I congratulate him on that, and it's a disappointing result for us. I don't deny that either. What I think is the key point I would draw attention to is that before the last election, as we were talking about earlier on, we lost the Ribble Valley by-election with, as it happens, exactly the same swing, a 22% swing against us. Before the 1987 election, an election which we later won with a majority of 100, the Rydale by-election we lost with a swing against us of 18%. So these are, I would have preferred to see us do better. But the history of the last two general election campaigns is of recovery from a position not unlike the one we see tonight.
Well, we're joined by Brian Jenkins, the victor in Staffordshire South East. Mr. Jenkins, congratulations on your victory.
Thank you very much, David.
What do you make of, I don't know whether you heard what Stephen Dorrell was saying, that the Tories can recover from all this. This is all by-election blues still, and they'll take the seat back. They'll win Tamworth.
Well, let Mr. Dorrell say that, because that's what they said all during the campaign. They were going to hold this seat. They failed to realise one thing that we realised quite early on. The people of this country and the people of South East Staffordshire no longer trust the Tories, and they were coming over in large numbers directly to Labour. They're actually starting to believe in our policies. They know that unless this country gets a Labour government, we're going to continue to slide down like we have done in the last few years. Unfortunately, we think this government will cling on to power and take this country down with them. If they've got anything about them, if they love this country and wish to put it first, the answer is simple. John Major must now go to the country for a general election. A lame duck government cannot enter any negotiations or any contracts, and our partners in Europe and all around the world must now be fearing what the outcome will be if this government clings on to power.
But you don't expect him to give up, do you, just because you've won a by-election?
It is not just because we won a by-election. This is a humiliating defeat for the Tories. In fact, the swing against the government is always on a scale of mid-staffs when they're at the height of their unpopularity with the poll tax problems. Now, they thought they solved all their problems out. Ken Clarke has said they brought back the feel-good factor, and this is the result. If this is the feel-good factor for the Tories, then I feel that they're doomed, and they should realise that.
What would you say was the issue that most persuaded people to leave the Tories and vote for you? What would you honestly say, looking at the issue, was the one that most counted?
There's not one issue. It's a series of issues. They now believe they can't trust this government. This government can't get it right, and they've told me, and I'm not on about dozens, hundreds, have told me it is time for a change. They have no confidence in this government any longer, and they were Tory voters.
What happens to you now? The seat vanishes at the next election, becomes Tamworth. Are you going to be the candidate for Tamworth?
I hope so.
Are you going to take Tamworth?
I believe we're going to take Tamworth, yes.
Mr. Jenkins, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, David.
Well, what does Labour in the studio make of it, John Prescott?
Spectacular result, isn't it? What else would you expect me to say?
I don't know. You always say unexpected things on these occasions.
But it is a remarkable result. I mean, if you look at the kind of past results we were comparing them with before, for example, Langbar, well, it's sometimes, the swing is 7 times greater than that. Monmouth, it's twice the swing we got there. Mid-Staffs, which is talked about very high at about 22%, it's higher than that. And do bear in mind what the Tories were saying here, that they were going to win. They were predicting they were going to win. They fought the most tenacious campaign, according to Mr. Duncan, and he was going to rely on their judgment. And what it now appears that they've got the worst result the Tories have ever had, really, against Labour, so close to a general election. And I think their hopes of a recovery from this election, as was so predicted, has now been completely demolished.
When did the Liberal Democrats last lose their deposit in a by-election, Nick Harvey?
It's not a fact I have closely to hand. This was always going to be a tough election for us. It's the job of politicians on these occasions to find some statistic or another they can to bring out as a crumb of comfort, and I'm not going to disappoint you in that regard. If you compare this by-election with the two at the start of the Parliament, where Labour was starting in Newbury and Christchurch from a similar basis to the one that we're starting from here, our election tonight is about twice the rate they were getting in those two. So there we are.
Sorry, your what tonight is twice
our percentage tonight is double what they got.
When did you work that little sum out? Before you came into the studio?
Well, I've been doing some mental arithmetic since I realised what I was going to be called upon to say at this stage in the day. But, I mean, it's Labour's night. All the by-elections in Tory seats in this Parliament have been won by the party that was in second place. This is no exception to that. Really, the Conservatives have told us again and again that they're going to turn the tide. Their recovery was going to begin at the party conference, and it was going to begin in the new year, but Emma Nicholson's defection rather put the dampener on that. It was going to begin in this by-election. Again, it hasn't. They're running out of time. And the truth of the matter is that this is not in itself proof positive that they're going to lose the election, but it is another nail in the coffin, and they're giving themselves a huge mountain to climb in a very short time.
Well, some love it, Peter, some hate it. Can we see what you extrapolate from this by-election?
We can't beat what happened in Dudley West, when the Tories were left with nobody at all on the opposition benches, on the government benches. Let's just have a look then at our swingometer first. Here we have the swingometer with the vulnerable Conservative MPs here. Here's the swing to Labour. Let's see what happens to those blue seats as the pendulum swings across to 22%. One of the best Labour swings ever. Not as good as Dudley, it's true. The pendulum then went right off the arc altogether, and not quite as good as Dagenham and Barking, but nevertheless one of the best Labour swings ever, 22%, demolishing a huge number there of Conservative seats, as you can see. And what would that mean in the House of Commons if these changes were reflected in every seat in the country? Mr Major will be there with 48 on the opposition benches beside him. Paddy Ashdown's Liberal Democrats with 25. 30 Liberal Democrats, 25 others. And over here we have the line that Labour needs to cross if it's to get an overall majority. 330 seats is the magic winning post. And here comes Tony Blair's Labour Party, comfortably through it and beyond with 556 seats. And that would mean that they would be 556 against 103, a Labour majority of 453, if all these changes were repeated in every seat in the country, as in that swing in Staffordshire South East.
Thank you very much, Peter. Well, Mr James, your defeat this evening seems to have left the Tories or Labour with a majority of 453 in a House of Commons, according to Peter Snow. Commiserations with you, but what went wrong?
I don't think anything went wrong as such. It was a disappointing result. The main factor was stay-at-home voters.
But when you say nothing went wrong as such, presumably one of the things that went wrong as such was that the swing against you was 22%, one of the biggest in any by-election of recent memory.
That's not quite correct, actually. The swing in Dudley, which is the most easily comparable by-election, one not very far from here, was 10% more. So in fact we're improving from that by-election, and I think that's good news for us.
When the Chancellor of the Exchequer came up, he said that you were going to be the first beneficiary of the feel-good factor coming back into the Midlands. What happened to that?
Well, I think the feel-good factor is coming back into the Midlands, but the effect hasn't yet been felt on the voters.
I mean, were you irritated by the sort of optimism of the Tories, Alan Duncan, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and others, at the early stages of the campaign, giving you false hope?
Not at all. I was optimistic myself. I always thought it would be a tough fight, as indeed I said, and it proved to be. Unfortunately, the improvements in the economy, the reduction in crime, and the most recently published statistics from the Tamworth Chamber of Commerce, which indicated that 41% of firms questioned had taken on extra staff in the last 3 months, that almost 3 out of 5 firms had increased their order books, all good news for this constituency, had not got totally through to the voters. And obviously I regret that.
Did you expect it to be as bad as it turned out to be? Did you expect it to be as bad as it turned out?
Can't hear anymore.
No, it's because your earpiece has fallen out. Sorry, we'll just hang on while you put it back in. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry, can you hear me now? I'll just bask a bit while it gets refitted. Yeah, no, it's all right. Stay there. It's early in the morning. These things happen to everybody. An operation going on in his ear.
Yes, right. I can hear you all right now.
Yes, yep. I'm sorry to expose you to that embarrassment. They're tricky little devices. Yep. You must be disappointed by what actually happened. You weren't expecting it to be as bad as this.
I was disappointed not to win, but I respect the views of the voters.
So what happens now? Are you going to stand in Tamworth?
Well, that is, of course, not my decision. As you know, the new constituency of Tamworth will be the constituency to be fought at the next general election. The Tamworth Conservative Association, when it's formed, will decide who it wishes to stand as their candidate.
Would you like to stand there?
I would be delighted if I was offered.
Do you think you'd win if you did?
I reckon I'd have an extremely good chance, and the reason that I say that is that if we look at the most similar result to this by-election before the last general election, which was, of course, mid-Staffordshire, very close to here, we lost by a similar margin to today, and we won that back at the general election, and I would have confidence to do the same.
But of course you're closer to a general election, aren't you, this time round?
I don't think there's very much in it.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and I'm sorry about your wretched earpiece.
Not at all.
Thank you for putting up with
problems.
that. Okay. Well, that was the defeated candidate, Jimmy James, in this Staffordshire South East by-election, where we had a swing to Labour from the Conservatives of 22%, with a majority of 13,762, a turnaround from a Conservative majority last time round of just over 7,192. Before we leave, a last word from all of us, at least from all of you. Tony King, briefly.
Jimmy James a moment ago said nothing went wrong as such, and everybody in the studio laughed, and I laughed too, but I think there's something in what he said. I think one problem for the Conservatives at the moment is that they have an excellent candidate in a by-election, he fights a very good campaign, and nothing happens. And what is difficult for the Conservatives at the moment is to know precisely what they can do, what steps they can take to improve their situation. In mid-Staffordshire, the message was clear: you change your leader, you get rid of Mrs. Thatcher, and you'll improve your situation. Ditto, you get rid of the poll tax. It's not at all clear what exactly the government can do to pull out of the hat at the moment to improve its standing in any significant way. That's their real problem between now and the general election, whenever it comes, and it may come sooner than some people are suggesting.
Okay, John Sargent, a majority of one this government has. Do you think he can go on until this time next year?
I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for him to go on. That's Mr. Major. I think that what may well happen is that if we have, after all, just 2 Tories die even before the by-elections are held, it would mean that they lost their majority. This could easily happen within the next few months. The actuaries, and so sorry to bring up this grim subject, but it is a matter of what they do and how they work it out, but they reckon that 3 Tories could die. You're right, Stephen. 3 Tories could die in the next few months. But all that means that the question of whether or not there'll be a vote of confidence, if there was one put down by the Labour Party in those circumstances, it has to be taken, it has to be